Hey guys, tonight You step out of the dark and straight into a narrow stone street where the air smells like sheep, wet earth, and last night's fire. You tug at a collar that scratches your neck, blink at torchlight sliding along timbered houses, and feel your shoulders sink under the gentle weight of layers you didn't ask for. Somewhere a cart rattles by, and you realise your clothes are making half your decisions for you. Where you can walk, how fast you can move, even how long you can stand before your back sighs. You won't believe this. Button by button, tie by tie, the medieval world is quietly bossing you around through your outfit. All right, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe. But only if your heart says yes. Drop your location and local time in the comments too, because tonight this alley connects everywhere. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. You start with a shirt, the one you swear is trying to start a fight with your shoulders. It's linen, simple, pale, and surprisingly precious because somebody had to grow the flax, soak it until it smelled like swamp, beat it until their arms sang, and weave it into something thin enough not to chafe your soul. Over that you pull a wool tunic, the colour of late autumn. Not for fashion, at least not first. Wool breathes when you're sweating and keeps you warm when you're not. It's the medieval equivalent of a miracle fibre, long before anybody whispered the word polyester. Your belt goes on next, and suddenly the tunic behaves like it's been disciplined. It gathers, it drapes, it pretends to be elegant. You think you're done. You're not. Another layer slides over you like a willing shadow, sleeves that narrow your world just a little, a tabard that whispers what you're worth before you ever open your mouth. The more you dress, the more you realise clothing here isn't about comfort. It's geography, it's law, it's biography. People read you with their eyes and decide how polite to be based on a hemline. You step and your shoes argue. They're leather, stitched in a way your modern feet can't quite comprehend, thin as a folded note in places, stubborn as a promise in others. You swear you feel every pebble. Someone once decided this was natural walking, and you'd like a word with them. Above you, a hood goes up because rain announces itself with a medieval accent. Sudden, cold, and extremely personal. The hood narrows your world to a tunnel, and in it you march like a pilgrim even if you're just going to buy bread. And oh, bread. When you reach for it, you discover your sleeves are longer than your patience. They flirt with the butter. They flirt with the fire. They flirt with disaster. You tuck them back with a practiced flick you didn't know you had until this moment. This is how it happens here. You're trained by fabric, educated by knots, humbled by a stubborn cuff. Dressing is a daily rehearsal for the rest of life. Somebody nods at you, just once. Not friendly, not unfriendly, more like a customs officer of the street. Your belt buckle catches their eye. The shape of your boots is noted like an accent. You're being sorted. The city hums. Weavers argue with dyers 2 doors down. A woman shakes a cloak and sends a small storm of dust into the torchlight. Children scurry past dressed like tiny adults. Miniature tunics, miniature seriousness, practicing a gravity they haven't earned yet. You become uncomfortably aware that nobody here wears less. They wear enough. Enough to be warm, enough to be known, enough to be judged. You think of all the mornings you've thrown on a t-shirt without ceremony. Here, each tie is a treaty, each lace a signature. The medieval closet doesn't offer choices so much as consequences, and you feel them accumulating on your shoulders like snow. A whisper floats by inside the wool. Sometimes moleskins and sheepskins were worn fur in, so people walked around with secret warmth, a hidden animal hugging their ribs. You glance down as if expecting a tail to poke out. Then you notice the silence in yourself, the way the layers are slowing you down. You can't rush when your body's wrapped like this. You can only arrive. And in arriving, you become legible. You belong. A bell tolls. Somewhere a tailor is closing shop, folding tomorrow into bolts of cloth. You stand still and realize the night has dressed you too. It has wrapped you in wood smoke and footfalls and the soft threat of rain. Medieval clothing looked complicated because life was complicated, and fabric, stubborn and tender, kept up. You breathe. Wool breathes back. There's a particular rhythm to moving in these clothes. Like learning a dance no one bothered to teach you. You can't just fling yourself down a street anymore. Every step is measured by the tug of cloth at your knees, the scrape of wool at your elbow, and the occasional creak from a belt that's been passed down more than stories. You're not just walking, you're gliding through a fabric-based obstacle course where grace is survival. A gust of wind sneaks down your collar, and suddenly you understand why people in paintings always look mildly uncomfortable. Because they are. That feeling in your shoulders? That's not just posture. That's the tension of seams stitched too tight, of fabric that fights back. Every garment is a negotiation, between weather and warmth, between fashion and function, between how you see yourself and how others are allowed to see you. You pass a man in a brown tunic dyed with walnut hulls, his hands stained darker than the sleeves. He nods to you like he knows the pain of damp linen drying against your chest. He does. Everyone here does. You keep going. The hem of your cloak flutters behind you like a reluctant ghost. You wonder how often it's been stepped on, snagged indoors, or used to mop up wine no one could afford to spill. And just as you're adjusting a buckle for the 100th time, a woman strides past wearing a surcoat so wide it brushes both sides of the alley. She doesn't flinch. She's made peace with being a walking tent. Her veil dances in the breeze like it's alive. She's dressed not just for modesty or faith or fashion, but for space. The clothing gives her dimension, reach, a presence that doesn't require sound. You catch yourself stepping aside instinctively. Her clothes have entered the room before she has. A boy runs after her, tugging at his oversized sleeves. They're patched and stained, but lovingly so. You recognize the sleeve as part of an old coat you saw on a man yesterday. Nothing wasted here. Clothing doesn't die. It gets reincarnated, reshaped, resewn into something new. That patch on the elbow? It used to be someone's hood lining. The belt? Might have once closed a saddlebag. In a world where fabric is wealth, clothing is never just one thing. Someone once wore a full outfit made entirely of blankets stolen from an abbey. You heard it from a stable boy who swore he saw it himself, said the man looked like a walk-in bed, rustling like an angry dormitory, and no one stopped him. Because fabric meant status, and even a stolen robe made you somebody, at least until someone yanked it back. You stop in front of a bakery window. Warmth spills through the cracks. Inside, the baker is wiping flour from her apron. Linen again, but this time bleached pale with sun and ash. It flutters slightly as she moves, not out of grace, but from practicality. She doesn't want the dough clinging to her skirts. You admire her. Strong arms, singed brows, and the most impressive knot you've ever seen holding her sleeves out of the fire's reach. For a moment, you envy the simplicity, but then she pulls a thick wool wrap from a hook and drapes it over her head before stepping outside. Even she can't escape the armour of fabric, because out here, every stitch counts. People freeze in winter without enough of them. They get judged, mocked, married or ignored depending on what their layers say. A young girl trails behind her, wearing an adult's cloak hastily hemmed. It swallows her whole. You recognize the look in her eyes, that combination of dignity and discomfort that only comes from wearing something meant for someone else. A rite of passage, really. And finally, as the bell rings again and shutters close for the night, you feel it fully. You're wearing time. Generations of habit, labour, pride, fear, modesty and ritual, all draped on your shoulders like a secret shared with everyone. You're not just clothed, you're coded. The wind picks up. You clutch your hood tighter, grateful for every itchy thread. In the medieval world, looking complicated was just surviving. It was communicating without words. It was declaring yourself with wool and linen instead of ink. You step into the dark, and the dark makes room for you. You wake up before dawn, and the room is already cold. Not the brisk kind of cold that nips your fingers politely, but the deep, bony kind that settles in your joints like regret. Your breath fogs in the air above your straw mattress, and you know today's first decision isn't about breakfast or prayers. It's about shame. Or more precisely, what happens if someone sees you in the wrong layer? You sit up, still wrapped in your sleep shift. It's a simple linen garment, loose and long, and it's the only thing you wore to bed. But here's the twist. Being seen in it, just that, is worse than being seen naked. No, really. In the medieval world, your undergarments were never meant to be witnessed. Nakedness was associated with nature, vulnerability, even religious symbolism. But being seen in your chemise, that was indecent. That meant you were caught in the middle of transforming, somewhere between public and private, civilized and unfinished. So you move fast. The shift stays on as you reach for the next layer, your base tunic folded nearby with surprising care. As you slide into it, you become slightly more human in the eyes of the world. The tunic transforms you from vulnerable flesh into someone with a place, a role, a name, even if you're still barefoot, even if your hair's a mess. Someone knocks, a soft rap on the wood, followed by the creak of the door. It's just your sister, or maybe a servant, but your body still jolts. You instinctively pull your cloak across your chest, even though it's not that revealing. Why? Because even being seen without your outer layers can stain your reputation. There are cases in old town records where women were fined, or worse, after being seen in a state considered inappropriate for the lane. The lane, not the court, not the church, just outside the door. You wonder how people survived with this much pressure on their sleeves. Your mind drifts to church, because today you're going, and that means your best tunic, longer, finer, and freshly brushed. You pull it on slowly. The neckline is modest, of course, and the sleeves are tight, buttoned from wrist to elbow. You need help with the buttons. Most people do. That's why so much of medieval dressing was social. You dressed others. They dressed you. A community of laces and ties and silent understandings. There's even a word used in some regions, disordering, for being caught without a proper overdress in the presence of strangers. It wasn't nudity that ruined you. It was disorderedness. The appearance of a life unravelling. Now you're laced up, cloaked and decent. You step outside. But your neighbour, young Tom, isn't so lucky. You spot him clambering over a stone fence with nothing but a ragged shirt, red-faced and barefoot. Kids laugh. Someone yells, church bells echo across the rooftops like ripples on frozen glass, and the town begins to stir. You join the quiet procession toward the chapel, wrapped in cloth and quiet purpose. Every footstep is deliberate, not just from cold, but from awareness. In this world, clothing isn't just what you wear, it's where you belong. As you pass the baker's boy, you catch a glimpse of his bare ankle. Just a flash between hose and hem. Harmless, you think. But behind you, someone clicks their tongue. No garters today. The comment lands like a pebble in still water. The boy flushes, tugging at his stockings. You keep walking. The unspoken rules are everywhere. A belt worn too low. You might be signalling flirtation, a head uncovered in church, disrespect, an unmarried woman with her hair loose. Either she's a bride or she's broadcasting something else entirely. You've seen it go wrong before. A travelling merchant once wore his Italian doublet open at the chest, thinking it was stylish. The villagers stared like he'd arrived without pants. He didn't come back. Inside the chapel, warmth blooms. Not from heat, but from bodies gathered under vaulted stone. You remove your hood, not your cloak, and kneel with care. The wooden pews creak beneath thick layers of cloth. From behind you hear the rustle of veils, the clink of belt rings, the small hush of wool brushing wool. Every person in here is wrapped like a secret, but the secrets are public knowledge, and then you notice her. 3 rows ahead, Lady Marjorie shifts in her seat. Her dress is breathtaking. Deep plum, tight-laced at the bodice, and so many layers that her silhouette looks carved from plum pudding. But it's not the colour or cut that draws you in. It's the way people glance and quickly glance away, because her undersleeves are made of silk, real silk, probably imported, and her neckline dips just slightly, enough to show a pale linen smock beneath, perfectly pressed. You hear a whisper behind you. She's flaunting again. Someone hums in agreement. You try not to react, but you remember last winter, when a woman was accused of seduction simply for being seen drying her chemise near a fire where men could see. The clothing wasn't the issue, the context was. A child fidgets beside you, his tunic halfway unlaced. His mother swiftly ties it, tugging the cords with a snap. A stern glance. He stops moving. You remember being that age, the way the tightness of a belt or collar felt like discipline itself, like obedience was stitched into every thread. When the priest enters, the room stills, not just from reverence, but because he wears a robe dyed so black it almost shines blue. The cloth is plain, but the absence of decoration is its own statement, a kind of power through restraint. And suddenly, you understand why being underdressed, or wrongly dressed, feels like a form of absence, like something crucial has been left behind, like dignity or control. The sermon floats past, half heard. You're thinking of sleeves, of laces, of the tiny moment earlier this morning when your shift caught on a nail and exposed a sliver of thigh. No one saw. You think, but if they had, would they remember that more than the prayer you muttered or the alms you gave? You breathe deep. The incense is heavy today. It sticks to your cloak, your hair, your skin. You'll carry it all day, like a silent mark of where you've been. Clothing does that. It holds memory. Soot, sweat, spices, all woven into your fibres like a diary you never meant to write. As you leave the chapel, you walk slowly. The hem of your gown whispers against the stones. You pass by Lady Marjorie again, and this time her gaze meets yours. There's no shame in her eyes, only precision. She knows exactly what her dress says. She wrote the sentence herself. Back home, you remove your outer cloak and hang it near the fire. Your shift, still beneath it all, clings to your ribs like a second skin. You smooth the fabric, suddenly grateful for its quiet presence. It has guarded you today, held you, hidden you, and if needed, it would have betrayed you. You lie back on your pallet and realize something odd. All day, no one saw your body, but everyone saw you. Cover your sins. It's a joke, mostly, but also not, because undergarments aren't neutral here. They imply intimacy. Even being caught in just your brays, the medieval equivalent of boxers, could be read as vulgar, or rebellious, or worse, tempting. You remember a story your grandmother used to whisper, about a woman in the next village who ran into the street after a kitchen fire wearing only her smock. She saved the baby, the cat, and the cheese. But people still talked about her for years. Not because she screamed, not because she forgot the bread, but because she didn't stop to put on her outer dress. That's what modesty meant here. Not silence, not passivity, but containment. Wrapping yourself in layers that held you in place, socially, morally, visually. You adjust your hood. The sun's barely risen. The frost bites at your nose. But inside the linen and wool, you feel almost safe, almost whole, almost ready to be seen. You wake to a faint scratching sound. Not from mice, not from a restless neighbour. It's coming from you, beneath the layers. You scratch, then pause, then scratch again. The linen shift you slept in feels softer now, warmed by your skin. But there's something alive under there, and it's not your imagination. Welcome to the daily dread. Lice. Not a sign of uncleanliness necessarily, just a fact of life. Fabric is shelter, and not just for you. You sit up and begin the ritual. First, the shift comes off. It gets shaken hard outside the door just in case something's taken up residence in the seams. You beat it with a flat stick for good measure. Then comes your next tunic. Heavier wool, coarser, dyed a deep, earthy brown. You pull it over your head and feel the familiar weight settle onto your shoulders. This one's seen many winters, and it smells faintly of smoke and old soapwort. Then the third layer, your overdress. Fancier, stiffer, meant for going out, not working. Its sleeves are slightly flared, and there's embroidery near the hem. A luxury, stitched by your aunt when times were better. But it's not just about beauty. That hem, it doubles as a dust rag. You've seen women wipe their fingers on the edges when the bread oven is too hot or the candle sputters. No part of your clothing is wasted. Everything has a job. Now for your apron. Thick, simple, looped over your head and tied tight at the waist. It guards your underlayers from flour, grease, and the odd piglet paw print. Without it, you'd be doing laundry twice as often, which, in medieval terms, means breaking ice in the river and hauling wet wool up a hill. But you're not done. You need your coif, a linen cap that covers your hair and pins it down. No one wants strands floating in the pottage, and besides, uncovered hair is for maidens, wild girls, and bedtime. You're respectable. You bend to fasten your hose, which attach to your braids with ties. It's awkward, especially in a cold room with stiff fingers. The hose are wool too, and not matched. One is slightly darker. You don't care. Most people don't. Your feet slip into turn shoes, thin leather, no heel, soft as buttered parchment. You've lined them with straw today. The ground is frost-bitten, and you're not trying to lose toes before supper. Finally, a girdle belt worn high cinches everything together. It's more than decorative. It's the medieval pocket. You hang a pouch from it, maybe a knife, maybe a set of keys if you're lucky enough to have doors worth locking. Someone once said, "A woman without a belt has no power," and you suspect they weren't entirely wrong. As you leave the cottage, your arms move a little stiffly. That's expected. With 5 layers between you and the world, your movements feel deliberate, controlled. You don't run, you glide, or trudge depending on the mud. But each layer has purpose. The underlayer soaks up sweat and oils. The second holds warmth. The third is for the world to see. The fourth, an apron or tabard, protects everything beneath. And the fifth, that's for luck, or pride, or simply the joy of being seen as more than a walking heap of obligations. A woman down the lane is already hanging her shift to dry. It's thin and nearly transparent in the sun, and she's bold for showing it. A few heads turn. One man whistles, but she ignores him. She's got lice to boil and a chicken to chase and no time for opinions. Her outer tunic hanging on the fence flutters like a battle flag. You keep walking, You're bundled, laced, tied, belted and stitched. And still, just barely, you itch. By midday, the sun climbs high enough to make you sweat, and suddenly your layers feel like a trap. Wool against wool, linen clinging to damp skin, and that apron, so protective this morning, now acts like a furnace strapped to your stomach. You pause in the shade of a cart to catch your breath, slipping a finger beneath your neckline to fan the heat away. But you don't dare disrobe. Not here, not even one layer. Instead, you adapt. You shift the apron to the side, loosen the belt a notch, roll up your sleeves, though not too high. Wrists are fine. Elbows? That's scandalous, depending on the company. Modesty here isn't just about how much you cover, it's about how deliberately you do it. Wrinkled fabric can be forgiven. Disarray cannot. You pass a boy chasing a goose, and he's wearing nothing but his tunic, short, loose, his legs bare beneath. A few older women shake their heads. "Where's his hose?" one mutters. "His mother will catch the shame before he does." You remember when you were that small, when clothes were just playthings, hand-me-downs worn until the seams split, mended and worn again. Now every garment is an agreement between body and world. Back at the well, a young woman hauls water with her sleeves tied above her biceps. She's rolled them and knotted them in a way that suggests both function and style. It's clever and technically proper, but her neighbours still look twice, because clothing here always walks a line, one knot too daring, one collar too wide, and suddenly you've become a conversation. Later, when you return home, you finally peel back the layers, the outer gown first, now dusty at the hem, and stained with something you hope is only wine. Then the apron, heavy with the day's grime. The tunic underneath is damp at the back, and when you lift it off, it sighs like it's glad to be free of you too. You lay them out near the hearth, not to dry, but to breathe. Fabric here lives. It remembers. It absorbs not only scent and heat, but mood. Some say that if you wear the same tunic too many days during mourning, the grief clings even after washing. That's why some widows burn their outer garments before remarrying, not because they're spoiled, but because they're saturated with the past. You brush your shift gently. It's still holding together, though the neckline is fraying. You'll mend it after supper, or tomorrow. Maybe. There's always mending. Some women walk around like living patchwork, squares of old sleeves sewn into skirts, apron strings made from curtain scraps, bodices stiffened with folded rags. But even in all that repair there's pride. It says, "I made this last." You sit by the fire and pick at the seam of your sleeve, half listening to a neighbour who stopped by with news of someone's cloak being stolen. A whole cloak, imagine that. "Tore it right from the nail," she says. "Must have been good wool." That's not just theft. That's almost a curse. To lose a layer is to lose face. Outside, the air chills again. Evening settles and you slip back into the second tunic you wore today, now aired out and warm by the hearth. It slides over your shoulders like something old and forgiving. You lace it closed with practiced fingers and pull your belt snug. The itch has eased for now, but in the folds of your linen something shifts, a flea maybe, or just the memory of one. Either way, you don't mind. Tomorrow you'll do it all again. You crouch by the hearth in the low light of morning, poking at a pot of boiling cloth. It smells earthy and strange, part plant, part vinegar, part wet animal. You're dying today. Not for fun, not for flair, but because your only decent outer tunic has faded into a colour best described as dishwater after stew. And that simply won't do. Not if you want to be taken seriously at market. Dyeing is no delicate business. It's labour. You gather woad, crush it, ferment it until it stinks worse than the privy, and then soak the cloth for days. When it finally turns blue, it's not the colour of sky or sea, but something deeper, a bruised sort of blue, noble if patchy. You remember your aunt's hand stained for a week after she dyed your cousin's wedding dress. She wore gloves, but the colour still crept through, like gossip. And gossip, as always, follows colour. You step out into the street, freshly dyed tunic swinging stiffly around your knees, and you immediately feel it. Eyes. Not angry, not impressed, just measuring. Because in the medieval world, colours talk. Bright reds, that's power. Most likely madder root or imported cochineal. You can afford either. You're not one of the common folk anymore, or you've robbed someone who is. Deep greens. They mean ambition. Green was tricky, unstable, made by layering blue and yellow, and if you weren't careful, the whole garment rotted right on your body, literally. There's a story in town about a man who wore freshly dyed green hose, only to discover too late that the dyer skipped the rinse. He spent a month with blisters on his legs. They called him Picklefoot till his dying day. Black? Now that's serious. Sombre. Expensive. The kind of black that eats light costs more than most weddings. Getting fabric that dark took layers of dye, rare ingredients, and time. If someone wears true black, you either respect them or avoid their tax collector. And then there's purple. Ah, the forbidden fruit of the colour world. Real purple, royal purple, was made from the glands of Mediterranean sea snails, and it took thousands of them to colour a single hem. You've never even seen it in person, but you've heard of it, and you know this. Wear it without permission, and you're not just making a statement, you're making enemies. It's the sort of thing that could get you fined, exiled, or worse, accused of impersonating nobility. A girl runs past in a tunic dyed unevenly yellow, likely onion skins. It's cheerful, if blotchy. But her mother wears a softer brown, the tone of old soil, undramatic, durable. She's someone who gets things done. Her apron is unbleached. Her sleeves are rolled with purpose. You walk on, catching flashes of dye at every turn. A man in plum walks too fast, trying to outrun judgment. A woman in blue lingers by the well, confident, not flashy. A boy wears a cloak faded so badly it's turned into a question mark of a colour, something between once was red and probably shouldn't. And then, just past the tannery, you spot something rare. A green cloak, so rich it glows. It moves like ivy, shadows shifting under the folds. Its wearer is tall, hooded, gloved. No visible skin, no clear origin. That cloak says everything and nothing at once. People step aside, not out of fear, but out of colour. You clutch your newly dyed tunic and wonder, do you look bold or foolish? A gust of wind answers, both. Later that afternoon, you find yourself crouched beside the riverbank, rinsing a length of cloth dyed with weld, a golden yellow that catches the sun like a banner. You wring it out, hands red from the cold, and watch the dye cloud the water like melted butter in broth. Around you, other villagers do the same, rinsing, beating, muttering about fading and bleeding, and cloth that won't hold colour no matter how many times it's soaked. One woman sighs and lifts a sleeve streaked with what was once crimson. Beetroot again, she groans. Why do I even try? You don't have the heart to tell her beet dyes always fade. Everyone knows it, but hope has a longer shelf life than pigment. You drape your tunic over a bush to dry, then sit beside it and stare at your hands. They're stained faintly green at the edges, your fingernails rimmed with grime. And yet, this is a small badge of pride. People notice. They'll ask what plant you used, what you mixed it with, how long you soaked it. If it turns out vibrant, you've earned quiet applause. If it doesn't, you've learned a lesson in silence. There's something magical about the alchemy of colour in this world. Not just how plants become pigment, but how people become meaning. A cloth doesn't just change hue, it changes what others think of you. Back in town, the Drapers' Guild is arguing again. You can hear their raised voices echoing through the alley. One is furious about a rival selling inferior dye work. You smirk. Inferior usually means affordable. But to them, colour isn't beauty. It's currency, control, influence. The guild sets the tone, literally, of who wears what and when. Wear a forbidden shade and you risk being called up before the local court, especially during festivals or church days, when the town becomes a rainbow of rules. Not long ago, a newly wealthy fishmonger's wife tried to wear a gown trimmed in scarlet to the mayor's feast. She claimed she'd inherited it. The mayor's wife claimed she hadn't. By sundown, the gown was stripped, the woman fined, and the cloth returned to the guild for redistribution. You heard it ended up on the sleeves of 3 choir boys and one extremely smug laundress. You run your fingers along your drying tunic and wonder where the lines really are. When does admiration become arrogance? When does admiration for colour turn into theft of status? At the tavern that night you enter wearing the new garment. It's not bright exactly, but it glows faintly. In the firelight, golden around the seams. People glance, then glance away. A few nod, a few look too long. One man, tipsy, calls it sunlight with sleeves. You sit quietly, nursing a small ale, listening to the clamour. Someone spills mead, someone sings, and somewhere behind you, you hear, "Who died that for her?" followed by a low murmur you can't quite make out. You adjust your belt and keep your back straight, because here, colour is armour just as much as wool is warmth. It speaks when you don't. It defends when you're silent, and sometimes it lies on your behalf. As you walk home under a sky the colour of ashes, your tunic brushes your knees. A scrap of weld leaf is still stuck to the hem. You pluck it loose and toss it into the wind. Let it carry a little gold where gold's never been. The first thing you feel when you wake is not hunger. It's the weight of wool. Even before your eyes open, it's there. Pressing on your chest, itching at your elbows, warming the underside of your knees like a second skin with opinions. You stretch under it slowly, like you would under snow, careful not to move too quickly in case the blanket shifts and lets in the morning cold. Your bed isn't really a bed. It's a straw mattress tucked into a wooden frame, and your only cover is a woolen blanket so dense it could double as a door. It was spun and woven by your cousin last summer, and you remember the way her hands ached from the spindle. It weighs almost as much as a sheep, and in many ways, it still smells like one. You rise, blinking at the dim light, and step into your woolen undertunic, still slightly damp from yesterday's snow. There's no avoiding it. Wool is your constant companion. Linen touches your skin, but wool meets the world. Your cloak, wool. Your hose, wool. Even your hat with its comical flop to the side. It's made from the remnants of someone else's cloak, restitched into something vaguely fashionable. Why so much wool? Because nothing else survives. Cotton is rare and foreign. Silk is reserved for the wealthy, the royal, the untouchably clean. Linen is breathable, yes, but useless when wet, prone to tearing, and a terrible insulator. But wool shrugs off water. It breathes when you sweat and warms when you freeze. It's scratchy, stubborn, and slightly smelly, but it's also miraculous. Your entire climate strategy is built on a sheep's haircut. You wrap your woolen cloak around you before stepping outside. The cold bites hard, but you know your body heat will create a cocoon inside the fold soon enough. Everyone wears theirs differently. Some clasp it at the neck with a pin. Others knot it over one shoulder like a makeshift sash. Children are often bundled in what looks like an entire fleece, arms poking out like roots through a haystack. Across the lane, A man is hammering something while his hood slides down over his eyes. He doesn't pause to fix it. His wool cowl is stiff with frost and likely frozen in shape. That's the thing no one tells you. Wet wool stiffens like armour. You've had tunics so saturated by rain they stood up by themselves afterward, like scarecrows with secrets. You remember the time your cloak froze solid while walking home from the abbey. You were half a statue by the time you reached the hearth. It took hours to thaw, and it steamed like a roast as you did. Inside, your mother is folding a pile of newly carded wool into bundles. She picks through it like a baker with dough, sorting the coarse from the fine. Some of it will become thread, some will be spun into heavier cloth, some, if it's clean enough, will be used to stuff padding into doublets or quilted armour. Nothing is wasted. Even the scraps from shearing are tucked into boots as insulation. You once wore a shoe so full of wool scraps it squeaked when you walked. At the hearth, someone's added a woolen foot wrap to the drying line. It smells sharp and earthy. You recognise the cut. Heel stitched high, toe rounded like a wrapped bun. It was likely soaked through during morning chores. Wool does that. It holds moisture like a secret. But it also keeps you warm even when soaked. That's its paradox. That's its magic. And that's why, despite the smell, the scratch, and the sheer stubbornness of it, you trust it more than you trust your neighbours. Later in the morning you visit the spinner's shed. It's warm inside, not from fire but from motion. The air hums with the rhythm of women turning wool into thread. Fingers dancing between distaff and spindle, pulling fibres with practised grace. You greet them quietly, not wanting to break the spell, and sit beside a basket overflowing with raw fleece. It smells of lanolin, hay, and late spring. You pick up a tuft, soft and full of little burrs. It'll need carding before it's usable, drawn between two boards covered in wire teeth over and over until it resembles a tame cloud. You've done it before. It makes your shoulders ache, but there's satisfaction in it. Wool fights you, but it gives in eventually. Nearby, one of the women tells a story about a shepherd who tried to wash an entire fleece in the village well. "Clog the whole thing," she laughs. "Water turned white for days." Someone else adds, "And he still tried to sell it after." You laugh too, picturing the poor fool hawking swamp wool at the market. Wool, in truth, is the lifeblood of your economy. It's exported, traded, taxed and fought over. Some say entire wars have been started over wool routes and tariffs. You wouldn't be surprised. Every noble household keeps sheep. Every monastery tracks their flocks like treasure. And towns like yours owe half their income to the cloth trade. Dyed, woven, then carted off to richer places. Even the church profits. You've seen priests in wool cloaks so fine they shimmer like silk, trimmed with lamb's fleece from special spring shearing. Humble material, they call it. But you've seen the ledgers. Humble has a price. When you leave the spinner's shed, you spot a merchant outside with a cart full of dyed bolts. Greens, browns, greys, some patterned with checks or stripes. He's arguing with the tanner about payment. The merchant slaps a wool sample book against his palm. Tiny swatches dangle from it, cataloguing every colour, weight and texture. You've seen those books used to settle disputes. If someone buys forest green and gets swamp green, that's a serious matter. Back at home, you hang your cloak on a peg, stiff with cold. It creaks. You run your hand along the inner lining. It's coarser than it used to be. Wool thins with time, like everything. That's why winter cloaks are often pieced together from old tunics. What once wrapped a child becomes part of a sleeve or a hood lining. Your own cloak has a patch under the arm made from your father's old leggings. There's a strange intimacy to it, wearing the past, carrying people in scraps and seams. Your grandmother's stitches still hold in your belt pouch. Your brother's old hose became your winter gloves last year. Nothing ever truly disappears. Wool outlives its wearers. At supper, you sit close to the fire, apron damp from snow. You warm your feet near the hearth, unwrap your legs, and pull off your hose. Beneath, your skin is damp but not cold. That's the marvel of wool. It held your warmth even in the slush. You hang the hose near the chimney and smile as steam curls upward. Your fingers itch from the day's work. You rub them together, and tiny fibres drift into the air, catching the firelight like dust motes. You watch them dance and vanish, knowing tomorrow you'll wake, layer up again, and step once more into your scratchy, miraculous second skin. It's not glamorous, but it's survival, and it smells just faintly, comfortingly, of sheep. You're running late. That's not something you can easily fix in this world, not when getting dressed is a 15-minute battle between you and gravity. You stumble toward the wooden chest at the end of your sleeping mat, fling it open, and immediately regret every life choice involving laces, hooks, toggles, buttons, and ties. You reach for your undershirt first. Linen. Soft, thankfully. It's been washed and worn enough to lose its swamp stiffness. But it still smells faintly of the lye soap your cousin insists is gentler, despite peeling a layer of skin off your hands last week. Then comes the tunic, heavy wool, navy blue, dark enough to hide stains, light enough not to look funereal. You go to pull it over your head, but it snags on your arms. There's a moment of genuine panic as it locks across your face, trapping you in a woolen void. You flail, you grunt. You consider just living like this now, becoming a hooded figure of folklore. But then the tunic yields and slides into place, sagging comfortably around your hips. Time for the belt, a narrow leather strap with a brass buckle that never quite stays in the right hole. You cinch it too high, and now you look like you've been squeezed by a medieval corset. Too low, and you resemble a travelling lute player with bad intentions. You settle for slightly above your waist, because that's where your knife and pouch sit without banging your thighs when you walk. You bend down to grab your hose, and that's when you remember you still haven't fixed the drawstring. One side's longer than the other, so when you tie them, the knot pulls unevenly, and your right stocking sags like it's questioning your life choices. You tug it tighter, but now your toes are going numb. Balance. It's always balance. Now for your surcoat, a sleeveless overdress that slips over your tunic. It hangs well at least, though it's faded at the shoulders. You cover it with a cloak lined with wool and fastened at the neck with a plain iron clasp. It's your third clasp this year. The others snapped during poorly timed twirls or urgent outhouse visits. You reach for your shoes, and Button stares back at you with disdain. A single wooden toggle that's supposed to loop through a leather strap you can't quite see while bent over. You try 3 times before giving up and stepping on the back of your heel just to get the thing on. Later, you'll fix it. Probably. Dressed finally, you grab your cap, a rounded woolen thing with ear flaps that tie under your chin if you're willing to sacrifice all dignity. You tie them. You don't care anymore. Outside, your neighbour waves from her door. She's wearing something almost identical, but hers is better fitted. She's already dressed her 3 children. One of them is wearing a miniature version of your own surcoat, and you wonder if hers has the same snag near the hem from catching on door latches. You nod, breathless. She raises an eyebrow. Late. Start, you grunt. She smirks. Should have laid your toggles flat last night. Toggle shaming. It was only a matter of time. As you start down the lane, your belt creaks. You hear a button pop loose behind you. You ignore it. Fast fashion? You wish. Medieval dressing isn't fast. It's not even neutral. It's an experience, a battle, a public performance wrapped in wool and tied with string, and every tie is a trap waiting to happen. Midway through your walk, You pass a young man struggling with his lacing points. One arm is inside his doublet, the other tangled up like a cat in a curtain cord. He's swearing under his breath, tugging the leather ties that connect his sleeves to the body of his garment. You feel for him. Because while buttons may rule your outfit today, ties and laces once ruled everything. In fact, before buttons went mainstream, most clothing relied on points, stiff cords threaded through eyelets to hold sleeves, hose, and bodices in place. Simple in theory, infuriating in practice, especially if the eyelets are fraying, or if you misalign the holes and find your sleeve on backward. You once heard about a nobleman who accidentally laced his right sleeve to the left armhole in a hurry before a feast. He spent the whole evening pretending it was a new French fashion, while discreetly eating with only one hand. Confidence, you suppose, is half the battle. You continue walking, pulling your hood up against the drizzle. It slides awkwardly to one side, because of course the button holding it in place came loose last week, and you never found the time to stitch it back. You tuck it under your chin and keep moving, a bit lopsided but warm. At the market square, a woman is demonstrating hook-and-eye closures on a new style of bodice. It's a clever innovation, faster than ties, sturdier than pins, but people are sceptical. You overhear one man say, "Hooks? No honour in hooks, it's cheating." You chuckle. Only in this world could fastening your clothes too easily be considered untrustworthy. Still, there's something almost intimate about the way clothes used to come together. The way lacing a bodice required help, or how tying up a set of hose meant someone was usually standing nearby, holding your elbow while you leaned dangerously off balance. Dressing was social, cooperative, a quiet dance of elbows and fingertips, and knowing how to thread leather without poking someone's eye out. Back home, you take off your damp cloak and try to re-knot one of your fraying sleeve cords. The end splits like a broken reed. You'll have to replace it. But replacements take time, and skill, and patience. You open your sewing kit, which isn't really a kit. Just a wooden spoon box repurposed to hold a dull needle, some bone toggles, a few scraps of waxed thread, and 3 buttons that match absolutely nothing. You search for a usable tie and come up empty. So you do what everyone does. You borrow one from a less visible part of your garment. That little underarm loop no one notices? Gone. Now your cuff stays put. But if you lift your arm too high, everything might come undone. You sit by the fire, picking lint off your hose, and wonder how people centuries from now will judge medieval dress. Will they see elegance, complexity, madness? They won't see the daily panic of trying to loop a button through a shrinking leather strap in freezing rain. They won't feel the way a single undone lace makes you feel like your entire identity is unravelling. They'll probably call it beautiful. Maybe it was. You sigh, lean back, and eye your remaining laces like enemies in a polite duel. Tomorrow you'll fix the hood clasp. Probably. Maybe. Or you'll just tie it tighter and pretend it's intentional. The smell of roast onions drifts through the alley, and you follow it toward the square, your boots clapping quietly against the cobblestones. But just as you reach the baker's corner, you stop short. A man in a fur-lined tunic struts past, his hat cocked too confidently, his sleeves suspiciously fine, his boots polished. Everyone stares, not admiring, assessing. Because today is a market day, and market days mean inspection. Not by officials, necessarily, but by neighbours, by whispers, by long looks and the sharp edge of collective memory. And that man? He's breaking the unspoken rules, or rather the spoken ones carved into city walls and enforced by fines, sumptuary laws. You've grown up with them. These rules govern who gets to wear what, how many buttons you're allowed, what fur you may line your sleeves with, whether your belt can be gilded or merely braided, and, most importantly, What colours are off limits to your class? You once saw a poor maid fined a week's wages for wearing a dress with velvet cuffs. She didn't even know the trim was real velvet. It had come from a cousin's discarded gown. But the constable knew, and that was enough. You pull your own cloak tighter. It's plain, undecorated, comfortably forgettable, safe. But you still check your hem, just to be sure no contrasting fabric is showing. Certain kinds of multicoloured cloth are reserved for wealthy merchants or high officials. Your tunic, a simple grey wool, is precisely the shade of not worth punishing. The man struts on, oblivious or pretending. His sleeves are slashed, a foreign fashion where fabric is intentionally cut to show the lining beneath. It's considered flashy, immodest, possibly even French. You hear someone behind you mutter, trying to look like a Milanese banker. It's not a compliment. And then the worst offence, his hat. A feather, long and red, curls dramatically over the brim. Red feathers, under local ordinance, are restricted to officers of the city guard or the nobility on festival days. This is neither, but no one stops him. Why? Because sumptuary laws aren't always about fairness. They're about control, and enforcement is uneven. If you're poor and dress above your station, you're punished. If you're rich and dress extravagantly, you're envied, or quietly tolerated. Sometimes both. You once heard a story about a young seamstress who embroidered silver thread into her wedding bodice, just enough to shimmer in candlelight. But silver was forbidden to her class. The town constable confiscated the entire dress on her wedding morning. She got married in her shift, red-eyed and shaking. Her husband later bought the same dress back from a merchant for triple the price. As you weave through the crowd, you notice how carefully everyone else has chosen their outfits. Merchants wear rich colours, but not too rich. Officials show off fur, but only on collars and cuffs. And the tailors? The tailors. They dress better than anyone and get away with it. Why? Because they make the clothes. And who's going to arrest the man holding your buttons hostage? You stop at a stall to examine a bolt of dyed wool. The seller eyes your belt, not your face, your belt. He's measuring your spending power by your accessories. You smile and let him. It's part of the game. You choose a modest shade, earthy brown, unthreatening, respectable. You could have picked green, but green suggests ambition, and ambition is something you wear only if you're ready to back it up. You carry your new bolt of wool beneath your arm, the coarse fabric already warming from the press of your cloak. As you walk home, you spot a familiar face at the pillory near the chapel wall. Not a criminal, not a thief, a woman, standing silently, arms bound in wood, wearing a dress a little too fine for someone whose family sells onions by the cart. A small group has gathered, not jeering, but observing, weighing. Her bodice is silk-trimmed, you realise. Not much, just a narrow edging along the neckline. But it's enough. Someone must have complained. You pause, not because you pity her, though you do, but because you understand. All it takes is one jealous neighbour, one merchant angry you undercut their price, one midwife who thinks your apron was a bit too decorative, and suddenly you're standing in the square, being reminded that fabric is not neutral. It never was. You step carefully around the crowd, lowering your eyes. Too much attention, even just observing, might look like support or dissent. Both are dangerous in the wrong cloak. Back at home, you fold the new wool carefully. You'll have it sewn into a safe gown. High neckline, no trim, functional, modest and invisible. That's the real luxury, being unseen, unnoticed, unremarkable. But later that evening you catch yourself staring at the scraps in your work basket. A bit of blue braid from a discarded sleeve, some leftover dyed thread, and for just a moment you consider it, just a little embroidery. Something small inside the sleeve hem where no one will see. Something for you. A rebellion no larger than your fingertip. You don't do it. Not tonight. Instead, you join your neighbours in the common hall. A few are laughing, trading scraps and stories. One of them, a brewer's daughter, has sewn tiny brass beads into the edge of her apron. They clink when she moves. You wonder if anyone else noticed. You hope not. You hope so. A man nearby tells a story about the guildmaster's wife, who once wore an ermine-trimmed cloak to the midsummer feast, knowing full well she wasn't entitled to it. When confronted, she claimed it was weasel fur, not ermine. The magistrate laughed, and so did the crowd. The cloak stayed on. And that, you realise, is the trick. The law is one thing, the performance is another. If you wear it well, if you own the story, if you speak the fabric's language fluently enough, sometimes you can slip past the rules entirely. Just don't get caught stammering. As the candles burn low and you prepare for sleep, you reach for your night shift. Simple, soft, safe. You fold your cloak and set it near the door. You pause. Then quietly, you lift the hem and stitch a single loop of green thread into the lining. It won't show. It doesn't have to. Tomorrow your dress will say, "I followed the rules," but your thread will whisper something else entirely. You wake to a chill in the air and the soft thump of something hitting your door. Likely a bundle of kindling dropped off by the neighbour boy. You wrap your cloak around your shoulders and step outside, and just as you guessed, there he is, darting down the lane in a puff of wool with a hat sliding sideways off his head. The hat. That's what catches your eye. It's enormous. Too big for his head by at least 3 sizes, and trimmed with a bit of fraying fur that looks suspiciously like it came from a torn cuff. You stifle a laugh, but then you pause, watching him vanish around the corner. Because here's the thing, he's trying to say something. In this world, hats talk louder than mouths. You've known that for years, even if you didn't always understand the dialect. A woman's veil pinned a little too far back. She's declaring independence, or carelessness. A man with a tall-crowned cap. He's letting you know he owns land, or wants you to think he does. Hats say whether you're married, mourning, foreign, employed, devout, or dangerously ambitious. They're not accessories, they're headlines. You head toward the centre of town where a hatmaker's stall has just been set up. It's market day again, and his wares are hung from a crooked pole like limp birds. Hoods, coifs, caps, veils, wimples, and felted monstrosities that would topple a weaker neck. He spots you looking and grins. Need something to change your fate? You smirk. Just trying to keep my ears warm. He lifts a felted bonnet, rounded with a turned-up brim, and places it on your head before you can protest. It smells like lanolin and smoke, like everything else around here. But the brim curves perfectly above your brow, and you catch your reflection in a polished tankard on his stool. You look respectable, maybe even confident. You tilt your head. Now you look clever. That's the power of the right hat. But it's also a risk. Because if you wear something too fine, or too distinctive, or too clearly borrowed from another station, you're sending the wrong message. And in this town, messages are received with interest. You remember old Breda, the widow who wore a white veil far past her mourning year. Some whispered that she was pretending to be pious to avoid remarriage. Others said she simply liked the way it shaded her face from the sun. Either way, her veil got her noticed, and not always kindly. Then there was the young clerk who wore a scholar's cap tipped with a ribbon of blue. That shade, mind you, was associated with minor nobility. He claimed it was a family colour, but no one believed him. A month later he quietly swapped the blue ribbon for brown. Your thoughts are interrupted by a group of children chasing one another in circles. One wears a coif tied backward, strings flapping in the wind. Another has a linen hood flopping over one eye. It's a game now, but someday those hats will speak for them too. You adjust the bonny on your head and hand over a few coins. The hat maker nods, pleased. You'll get better service in that one, he says. You believe him. As you walk back through the crowd, you notice the layered choreography of headwear all around you. A brewer in a stained felt cap. A midwife in a stiff white veil, spotless despite the mud. A noble steward in a cap so flat and wide it looks like a dinner plate. Each hat, a signal. Each veil, a flag. Each hood, a little manifesto tied beneath the chin. And now, yours among them. Back home, you place your new bonnet carefully on the peg beside the hearth, where it rests like a quiet trophy. You don't wear it indoors. That would be improper, unless you were receiving someone important, and even then only if your hair was uncovered, or you were trying to appear modest without fuss. That's the tricky thing about hats. Sometimes wearing one means humility. Sometimes it screams pride. You glance toward the fire where your grandmother's old wimple hangs drying. It's yellowed with age, edges frayed like parchment, and the linen has lost all stiffness. You remember her fingers folding it into perfect pleats. She could do it without a mirror. She wore it every day for 20 years. Said it made her feel like someone was always watching even when no one was. That's the point, she'd whisper. Better to be watched by linen than by people. You pick up the wimple and shake it out, then smile at the memory of when you once tried to wear it. The folds collapsed, the ties knotted wrong, and someone thought you were dressed for penance. You hadn't even sinned. Yet that day, everyone assumed you had. Because in this world, a misplaced veil is a confession. Later, in the town square, a small gathering forms near the steps of the guild hall. A boy is being presented as a new apprentice. The hat he wears is plain, but the ribbon around it signals his new role. Gold, but narrow, just a thread. Enough to mark the shift in his life, from child to tradesman, from burden to asset. Everyone applauds, his mother weeps, and you watch closely, not the boy, but the men behind him. The master wears a flat cap with a crisp white feather, perfectly legal for his station, but just close enough to noble fashion that it carries a hint of provocation. Another man, standing off to the side, wears no hat at all. That's its own message. Either you're so powerful you don't need one, or you've just lost too much to care. You think of the times you've chosen not to wear anything on your head. Risky. Uncovered hair invites questions. Is she grieving? Is she careless? Is she too vain to tie her hair back like a respectable woman? You've learned to time it carefully. Windy days, wash days, morning days. That's when you can get away with nothing on your head and still be read as appropriate. Bareheaded in the market, though. That's for fools or outsiders. You return home in the afternoon, and on. The way you pass a man wearing a liveried hood, edged with blue and silver. He works for a local knight and wears his master's colours proudly. You know the man barely earns enough to keep his children in shoes, but his hood grants him a sort of nobility by association. That's the strange alchemy of medieval hats, borrowed power through borrowed cloth. At home, you light a candle, sit by the window, and begin patching an old linen cap. The ties have worn thin, and you reinforce them with stronger thread. As you work, your thoughts wander. How many people have you misjudged, just by what sat on their head? How many times have you chosen your own hat not for warmth, or comfort, or even fashion, but for the story it told on your behalf? Tomorrow you'll wear the bonnet again. It will tilt slightly forward, lending your face a shadow of seriousness. People will nod a little longer, maybe step aside as you pass, and you'll smile just a little, because your head will be dressed, and therefore you'll be heard. You're trying to walk, but it's like dragging your feet through wet parchment. Your shoes, if you can call them that, a thin, stretched leather tied with stubborn cords, flapping slightly at the toes. You step over a puddle, fail, and feel the chill seep through your soul. Again. Welcome to medieval footwear, where style, status, and sanity never quite fit into the same pair of shoes. You glance down the street and spot a man wearing poulaines, long pointed shoes with curled up toes so exaggerated they could tickle a rooster. He's struggling to walk without tripping, each stride a calculated dance between vanity and gravity. The tips of his shoes are so long they have to be tied to his knees with ribbons to avoid dragging. You've heard some towns pass laws limiting the length of those points, 2 inches for a cobbler, 6 for a knight, and 12 for a fool, or something like that. But here's the twist. The longer the toe, the higher the rank, or at least the aspiration. Poulaines aren't made for walking. They're made for standing still and being admired. You'd need a servant just to carry your dignity around. You, however, wear turn shoes, flexible, stitched inside out, then flipped. They're practical, humble. They let you feel every pebble and splinter from here to the next village. You once stepped on a loose nail and felt it with spiritual clarity. You're fairly sure you met God that day. Still, turn shoes have their merits. They're silent on stone, soft on wood, and cheap to repair. You've patched yours 5 times. You've also stuffed straw inside during winter, wrapped them in cloth during rain, and once wore greased parchment between the layers just to keep out the snow. Across the street a tanner limps along, his boots reinforced with thick soles made from stacked layers of leather, stitched like armour for the foot. Not everyone can afford such luxury. Leather is a precious thing, especially the kind that's smooth and doesn't reek of lime and hides. Cheap leather shrinks when wet, stiffens like a wooden clog, and cracks like old bread. Your cousin wore a pair that once froze solid overnight. He had to soak them in soup the next day just to get them on. You remember the story of a priest who cursed his boots for squeaking so loudly on the cathedral floor that it ruined the solemnity of Mass. He tried stuffing them with moss. It only made the noise wetter. There's also the baker's boy, barefoot again. His mother claims he owns shoes, but he never wears them unless she's watching. His feet are so calloused they might as well be hoofed. You envy him in summer, but not in frost. In your own home, shoes are removed before entering, not out of cleanliness, but necessity. The mud is too clingy, the manure too loyal. The rushes on your floor can only hide so much. Besides, leather left by the fire dries too fast and splits. Shoes are coddled like livestock. You rub them with wax, oil them with lard, even whisper apologies to them when you scrape them too hard against cobblestones. You once saw a noblewoman descend from a carriage in silken slippers, not meant for walking, of course, just for being seen. 2 boys laid rushes on the ground in front of her like some bizarre green carpet. By the end of the walk, her shoes were still spotless. Yours, they've already soaked through. Again. You squelch through the alley, each step a gamble. One foot might land on dry stone, the other in something less appealing. The soles of your turn shoes flap slightly at the toes, seams pulling loose again. You'll have to stitch them tonight, or tomorrow, or never, and accept that you now live in a perpetual state of damp. You pass a row of stalls where a cobbler sits cross-legged on a stool, surrounded by scraps of leather, awls, and blunt needles. His fingers are stained darker than his boots, and he doesn't look up as you approach, just hums softly while running a thick thread through a wooden lace shaped like someone's foot. Someone with more money than you, judging by the fur-lined shoe being resold. "Got anything that'll make me float?" you joke. "Float? No," he grunts, "but I've got patterns." He nods toward a pile of wooden platforms, rough ovals with leather straps meant to be worn over shoes, lifting your feet inches above the filth of the street. You've tried them once. You nearly broke your neck. but in certain towns they're essential. In winter, the roads turn to slush. In summer, to dung. In spring, a cocktail of both. Wearing pattens means survival. They clack against the stones like horses' hooves, loud enough to announce your arrival from 3 lanes away. Some people hate the sound. Others see it as music. Status, rhythm, noise. The symphony of medieval footwear. You move on, eyeing other passers-by. A merchant wears low-cut shoes dyed red. Madder root, likely. Expensive and flashy. Red was bold, even slightly scandalous. Too much red and people talk. A woman across the square walks in ankle boots with tiny brass buttons running up the side. Completely impractical, completely charming. You wonder how many times she stepped in something unspeakable just to look that lovely. And then you spot the scribe. He's always sitting on the edge of the fountain, his ink-stained hands hidden beneath sleeves too long. His shoes are tied with silk ribbons of all things. That can't be legal for someone of his rank. But perhaps no one's noticed. Or maybe that's the point. In a world where clothing laws exist, breaking them subtly is an art form. Back home, you kick your shoes off gently. Habit, respect, maybe even superstition. Some believe you shouldn't place shoes upside down, lest bad luck settle in the toe. You don't know if that's true, but you don't risk it. The last thing you need is cursed footwear. By the hearth, your grandmother sits with her old felt boots, brushing off mud with a bunch of dried lavender. Softens the smell, she says, though it smells like wet dog and wilted herbs. Still, it's a ritual, one she's performed every night for decades. She once claimed that a woman who keeps her shoes in order keeps her whole life in step. You suspect that was more of a threat than a proverb. Later, by candlelight, you patch the sole of your turn shoe with a scrap of boiled leather. It's hard as bark, but it'll hold. You hum as you work. Outside, you hear the sound of pattens clacking over cobblestone fading into the dark. You glance at your shoes, now stitched and warm near the fire. They aren't pretty, they aren't symmetrical, but they're yours. And tomorrow, they'll carry you back out into a world where every footstep leaves a mark and every soul tells a story. One scuff at a time. You're leaning over a barrel, elbow deep in dough, when something crashes in the courtyard behind you. A yelp, a shout, and then silence. You wipe your hands on your apron and step outside, heart already sinking. A young man, barely more than a boy, lies sprawled in the mud, one arm twisted beneath him. A basket of iron tools lies scattered beside him. He moans softly and someone murmurs, "He fell from the scaffold." Again, you recognize him. He's a thatcher's apprentice, and this is his second fall in as many months. The first time he got lucky, just a bruised hip and a bad fright. This time, the awkward angle of his wrist says otherwise. But what you notice most isn't the wrist. It's what he's wearing. A quilted jack, laced tightly at the sides. You've seen one before, worn by a blacksmith's wife who swore it saved her from a flying horseshoe. It looks stiff and awkward, like wearing a padded bedroll, but it's protective, especially when working around things that fall, swing or catch fire. The boy groans. Someone fetches the surgeon. Someone else gathers his tools. And you're left thinking about the clothes that aren't just clothes. Because in the trades, whether you're a mason, a smith, a baker, or even a cook, what you wear could mean the difference between a bruise and a burial. You head back inside and brush flour off your sleeve guards, thick wool wraps tied just below your elbow. They keep dough from sliding into your cuffs, yes, but they also keep hot pans from scalding your arms when the oven spits. You've seen the scars on bakers who skip them. It's not pretty. Above the hearth, your father's old leather apron still hangs. It's stiff from years of soot and steam, but the straps are strong. He wore it every day in the forge until his back gave out. You remember how the edges curled up with heat. You remember how it smelled of iron and sweat. You remember how he once lifted a glowing coal off the floor with a hem and didn't even flinch. Clothing in your world isn't about elegance. It's about barriers between you and fire, you and stone, you and sharp corners. Every profession has its armour. The washerwoman wears a thick linen wrap around her waist, not for modesty but to soak up splashes from the river. The cooper wears a padded jerkin stuffed with wool so a falling barrel won't snap his ribs. Even the midwife wears sleeves stitched tight at the wrist. Cleanliness, yes, but also because loose fabric invites accidents, and heaven help the butcher who forgets his thick hide apron. You saw one once, slippery with blood, slit down the centre after a pig kicked too high. The man underneath was fine, the apron, shredded, worth every coin. You need dough, thinking of all the outfits not worn for beauty but survival. Someone once told you about a chimney sweep who fashioned a shirt out of stitched rags soaked in vinegar. Said it kept his lungs clear in the soot. You don't know if that's true, but you've never forgotten the image. A boy climbing into a fire's throat wrapped in rags and hope. Outside, the boy's cries fade as he's carried toward the healer. His quilted jack hangs open, the laces frayed. Someone will mend it. Maybe even reinforce it, because even in pain, even in fear, you never leave yourself unprotected again. Not here. The next day, you visit the market square and find yourself standing near the carpenter's stall. Two men are lifting planks of green oak onto a cart, and one of them is wearing a leather vest so stiff it could stand on its own. It's cracked along the seams and patched at the shoulder, with what looks like tin. Yes, tin, stitched in like a crude shield. You blink. He notices, grins and taps it with the back of his knuckles. Stopped a flying chisel once, he says. You believe him. The vest doesn't look comfortable or elegant. It looks like it's seen things, and that's exactly the point. In the working trades, fashion doesn't come from looking good. It comes from still being alive at the end of the day. You wander farther and notice a fishmonger folding a stained linen tunic, the shoulders coated with wax. At first it looks filthy, but then you realise it's intentional. Wax repels water. A waterproof tunic, homemade. She catches you staring and shrugs. Can't be slippery and soaked. You pass a stonemason chiselling a corner block. His wool cap is tied tightly under the chin, stuffed with rags to muffle the ring of tools. His sleeves are short, not rolled, but sewn that way, and lined with leather at the elbows where he leans against stone all day. His fingers are thick and cracked, but his tunic is precise. Reinforced seams, tight stitching. It's been engineered to survive him, and this isn't just about safety, it's about legal protection too. You remember the case last winter, when a cooper sued his apprentice for splintering a barrel and causing injury. The apprentice argued his jerkin didn't cover enough of his forearm, said he wasn't trained properly, said he bled for it. They brought the jerkin into court, used it as evidence. The seamstress who stitched it even had to testify. Your mind drifts back to your own gear. That linen apron you burned on the hearth last year. You patched it with the sleeve of an old wool tunic. Now it's a bit lopsided, but surprisingly effective. It catches sparks from the bread oven better than linen ever did. You haven't burned yourself since, and still, accidents happen. You once saw a tanner with leather braces up to his elbows dyed nearly black from lye. He'd lost 2 fingernails from a spill, but claimed the braces saved the rest of his hand. He wore them every day after that. Never cleaned them. Let them stiffen like bark. Even the younger apprentices, full of bravado and foolish energy, start out laughing at the bulkiness of protective dress, until they feel the heat of a forge on bare skin, or the sting of an axe handle glancing off a soft forearm. After that, they stop asking why. That night you sit by the hearth, watching your younger brother mend a tear in his sleeve. He's just begun training with the roofers. The tunic he wears is padded now, heavier than before and sewn with double seams along the spine and shoulders. You help him reinforce a patch with waxed thread. The needle fights you, but you get it through. "Think this'll stop a fall?" he asks, only half joking. You shake your head. "No," you say, "but it might stop the ground from winning too hard." He laughs. But tomorrow he'll wear it anyway, because here protection isn't optional. It's stitched into your day, into your sleeves, into every cuff and collar and stiff, awkward hem, and when you walk through fire, stone, steam or snow, your clothing walks first. You walk past the cloister gate just as the bell begins to toll, slow, deep chimes that roll out across the fields like fog. The monks are gathering for sext, and as the last bell rings, the outer door opens. They file in with quiet steps, their woolen habits swaying just above the ground like shadows that never quite touch the earth. You pause beneath an old yew tree watching them move. Their clothing is not flashy, not layered with lace or dyed with ambition. But there is something powerful in its simplicity, something deliberate. In the world outside, people dress to impress, to protect, to announce their station. In here, they dress to disappear. The monk at the back nods to you as he passes. His robe is a deep, softer brown, faded from sun and ash. It's hooded, long-sleeved, and belted with a simple rope. No decoration, no trim, not even a button. Just wool, thread, and silence. It's easy to think that monks and nuns had it simple when it came to clothes, but the truth is, religious clothing was among the most rule-bound in all of Europe. Every stitch meant something. Inside the cloister, a brother sweeps the flagstones with quiet grace. His scapula, a long panel of cloth worn over the robe like a stripe of humility, shifts with each movement. It's plain, functional, and a visible reminder that labour is sacred. You've heard novices whisper that wearing it makes them feel like part of something older than stone. A young novice shuffles past, clearly too small for his habit. The sleeves hang past his fingertips, and he walks on the hem like it's trying to eat him alive. You smile. Every monk starts there, drowning in cloth that's meant to make you feel small, on purpose. It's not about comfort, it's about surrender. Ego has no place in a robe that hides your shape, your stance, your swagger. Women in the nearby abbey wear similar garments, wimples and veils pinned so tightly you can barely see a wisp of hair. Their habits are cut close to the body, sleeves narrow, hems stitched high to keep from dragging through mud on the way to chapel. No embellishment, no softness, just linen and wool, dyed in browns, greys or blacks depending on the order. You once spoke to a nun who said her veil was her armour, not from the world but from herself. "When I wear it," she whispered, "I don't need to decide who to be. I already am." Of course, not all monasteries were equal. Some were wealthy enough that their humble habits were made from fine wool, softer than anything you'd ever wear. You've heard rumours of abbots and cloaks lined with rabbit fur, calling it necessary for health. You suppose humility is a bit more flexible when your roof doesn't leak. But for most, the robes are rough, itchy, heavy when wet. You tried one once on a dare, borrowed from your cousin's friend during Harvest Festival. It felt like wearing a carpet, thick and still and vaguely disapproving. You couldn't move quickly, couldn't gesture grandly. Your body vanished. So did your voice. And maybe that was the point, because in a world obsessed with who you are and what you wear, monastic clothing erased the question entirely. You weren't rich or poor. You weren't handsome or plain. You were just a figure in wool walking in the rhythm of bells. You step back from the gate as the doors close. Inside they return to silence. Outside your cloak flaps in the wind, louder than any robe would dare. The quiet of the cloister stays with you as you head down the lane. Something about those robes, how they moved, how they held still, clings to your thoughts like candle smoke. You can't stop thinking about how different it feels to wear clothes that are meant not to express, but to erase. At the edge of the village, you pass a group of pilgrims making camp near the chapel's outer wall. They're wrapped in a mix of garments, patched cloaks, frayed tunics, dust-streaked veils. One man wears a hood so large it casts his face in permanent shadow. A woman sits on a stump, adjusting her pilgrim's badge, a small tin scallop shell pinned to her mantle, marking her as someone who's walked far in faith. You greet them, and they nod back, polite but distant. These aren't just travellers, they're religious wanderers, and their clothes mark them as such. Their tunics are plainer than yours, their boots more worn, but their mantles, those half-cloaks draped over the shoulders, are carefully maintained. You've heard some monks say that the mantle is the symbol of the journey itself, protection without pride, purpose without ornament. The older man removes his hood to reveal a tonsure, the crown of his head shaved bare in the old style. You try not to stare. Tonsures are rarer now, but they used to be common, symbolic acts of humility. He catches your glance and smiles. The head must match the robe, he says. You smile back. It's a joke, but it lingers. Later, you help a friend deliver supplies to the nearby abbey kitchen. Inside, you're met with the smell of onions and warm bread, and the sound of wooden sandals scuffing across stone. The lay brothers, those who aren't ordained but work the land or cook the food, wear simpler versions of the monks' robes. Coarser, usually unlined, and always a bit shorter so they don't trip when hauling sacks of grain. One brother has rolled his sleeves to the elbow, revealing arms strong as any blacksmith's. His habit is patched at the knees and singed near the hem. Still, he wears it with the same quiet pride as the others. And it's not just men. You remember attending a festival where nuns from 3 different orders stood in a silent procession. At a glance, they looked identical: grey wool, white veils, black belts. But if you knew what to look for, you'd see the difference. One wore a rosary looped through her cincture, a mark of a contemplative order. Another had a scapular with a tiny, embroidered cross, work of her own hands, nothing flashy, nothing loud, but still deeply personal. Back outside, you think about your own clothes. They change with the season, the occasion, your mood. But the monks, the nuns, their garments rarely change, and if they do, it's almost always a sign of promotion, penance, or punishment. You once heard about a friar who spoke out too harshly against a nobleman's greed. He wasn't imprisoned, but they gave him a dyed habit, darker than before, and moved him to a different house. No one spoke of it, but everyone saw the robe. Everyone understood. His new colour was a sentence. At the tavern that evening, someone jokes about monks being the best dressed, since they never have to choose. There's laughter, but you wonder. There's freedom in uniform, yes, but also weight. The kind of weight that says, you've given up the right to decorate yourself. You've sworn to be a soul, not a figure. As the fire burns low, you pull your own cloak tighter and think about that wimple drying by the hearth, about habits that feel like walls, about veils that reveal more than they hide, and about the quiet power of being dressed not for the world but for something beyond it. Or you're elbow deep in cabbage, bent over a wooden trough, when someone calls out from the path, "Peddler's back from the east." You wipe your hands, toss your apron over your shoulder, and hurry toward the square. Because when the peddler comes, so do cloth scraps, ribbons, stray buttons, and, if you're lucky, news of how people are dressing 5 villages away. And if you're really lucky, maybe he's brought a new belt. Yours has more patches than leather at this point. The square is already buzzing when you arrive. The peddler, a wiry man with a crooked hat and a voice like creaking stairs, is unfurling bundles of coarse wool, dyed linen and bits of used velvet likely salvaged from the clothing of people far fancier than you. But what draws your eye most is the way the crowd is dressed. This isn't court or cloister, it's peasants, field hands, shepherds, midwives, and millers, and their clothing tells a story that never makes it into paintings. A woman beside you wears a working smock the colour of wet clay. The cuffs are frayed, and the hem is uneven, not from fashion, but from wear. You can tell she shortened it 3 times. Her tunic underneath is dyed with what looks like walnut husks, mottled and fading from years in the sun. Still, she's proud of it. She dusts off the sleeves as if it were silk. A boy tugs at his mother's sleeve, pointing at a strip of green cloth. His tunic has elbow patches, not stitched to match, just square patches slapped on where holes once were. His hose are wool, mismatched, with one garter made from braided twine. He looks wild and wonderful. That's the thing. Peasant clothing wasn't always plain, despite what the stories say. It was full of texture, patchwork, hand-me-downs, and the unmistakable flair of people who turn survival into art. You've seen tunics made from 4 different garments, cloaks lined with the old fabric from bedsheets, even belts braided from horsehair and old yarn. And colour? It wasn't absent. It was just earned. Natural dyes from roots and leaves created soft earth tones, browns, greys, yellows, faded reds. Onion skins gave golden hues, nettles, greens. Sometimes someone would get lucky and come across a bit of indigo or madder, and for a season they'd walk like kings. You remember your aunt's old apron. It started out blue, turned grey, and eventually became a patch on your cousin's winter hat. It had a spot near the corner, berry juice, from the time she slipped picking blackthorn. She always said the stain brought her luck. She never tried to scrub it out. Near the back of the peddler's cart, an older man is bartering for a rough-spun jerkin. He's already wearing one, but it's torn under the arm. His current one has been restitched so many times it's shaped like him. Shoulders permanently hunched, elbows puffed out. You know that shape. You see it on half the men in town by harvest season. Clothing here isn't about novelty. It's about repair. A shirt might be passed from father to son, turned inside out when the outside wore thin, or flipped front to back when the collar tore. You've worn sleeves with seams down the front instead of the back, because someone took the garment apart and rebuilt it in reverse. You glance down at your own tunic, second-hand, faded, patch beneath the left arm. It fits imperfectly, like most things in life, but it's yours, and somehow that's enough. As the peddler continues his routine, he unrolls a bundle of cast-off scraps, bits of brocade, velvet frays, twisted threads of gold too small for a full hem. You watch as a few of the village women edge closer, eyes shining with quiet calculation. Not for vanity, for possibility. One picks up a square of wine-red cloth, no bigger than a handkerchief. You hear her whisper, "This could line the cuffs of Tom's festival tunic." Her fingers tremble slightly, already measuring the fabric's fate. Not as decoration, but as dignity. You know this rhythm. Clothing in your world is never just one thing. A tunic becomes a shawl becomes an apron becomes padding for boots. The life cycle of cloth is long, and peasants are masters of resurrection. The blacksmith's daughter arrives, wearing a garment that could only be described as intentional chaos. Patches upon patches, sleeves in 2 different colours, and a sash braided from dyed flax fibres, and somehow she wears it like it's the latest Paris fashion. People stare, not in mockery, but admiration, because what she's done is clever and bold and hers. A man nearby carries a heavy sack of grain, dressed in a simple tunic sewn from rough homespun. The threads uneven and speckled with burrs. His belt is a piece of rope, tied 3 times around his waist with a knot so tight it looks ornamental. It's not. He just hasn't found a better one yet. And then you notice his shoes, wrapped in cloth, bound with leather thongs, because the soles are gone. He's walking in soft layers of history, each step cushioned by the remnants of older garments. A child darts past you, laughing, his tunic billowing behind him like a cape. It's clearly too big, clearly borrowed, the shoulders bunching awkwardly under his chin. But he wears it with the joy of someone completely unaware of his class. You remember when you were like that, when hand-me-down wasn't a mark of poverty, but a treasure to be claimed. Back at home that evening, you sit near the fire with a basket of clothing in need of repair. It's a familiar routine. You turn each garment inside out, study the seams, judge what's worth saving. A sleeve hem is worn but not torn, a neckline's fraying. The side seam of your cousin's tunic is unravelling like a secret finally told. You pull out your thread jar, which holds a tangled assortment of fibres, some spun from flax, some stolen from fraying blankets, 1 or 2 so brightly dyed they stand out like jewels in mud. You'll use those on the insides, tiny flashes of colour that no one sees but you. You stitch slowly, deliberately, as the wind howls outside. Every pass of the needle is part of something bigger, a defence against cold, a protest against waste, a memory of the hands who wore this cloth before you. As you mend a shoulder seam, your fingers run across a row of older stitches, uneven and clumsy. Your mother's probably. You smile. Her needle left a story. Now yours joins it. By the time the fire has burned low, you've finished 3 garments. Nothing new, nothing fancy, but everything ready for another day. The morning is damp and your shift clings to you before you even leave your bedding. You rise slowly, peeling the linen from your skin, and reach for your clothes. But today, your tunic feels heavier than usual, not from wool, from thought. You've been asked to help with laundry at the river. That means washing, scrubbing, lifting. But more than that, it means seeing what everyone wears underneath it all. Because today, you're dealing with undergarments. And in the medieval world, undergarments weren't just private, they were social landmines. Clothing might speak, but what lay beneath it? That was closer to confession. You bundle a stack of shirts, smocks, and brays, the loose-fitting linen underpants worn by most men, and head toward the bank. There, others are already gathered, sleeves rolled, knees deep in river mud, slapping wet fabric against stones like it owes them money. The splash of water, the chatter, the smell of soapwort. It's all familiar. But your eyes linger on the garments in the pile, a long fine chemise trimmed with narrow lace at the collar. That belongs to the baker's daughter, single, modest, but with a tiny frill no one is supposed to notice. Then a coarser smock, yellowed, patched along the neckline with what looks like a bit of curtain cloth, likely from old Lorna who hasn't had new linen in years. You lift a pair of brays, wide as sails, with a stitched-in gusset and twisted drawstring. Someone's husband walks around in these daily hidden underhose and tunic, and no one's the wiser. But here, at the river, they're hung on branches like flags of vulnerability. And that's the strange thing. These garments are never meant to be seen, yet here they are, laid bare, judged quietly, and known. You've seen people laugh over someone's too fine undercloth, or whisper when a patch looks suspiciously like a noblewoman's embroidery. Undergarments tell stories no tunic ever would. Take your own chemise. It's plain but not poor, carefully mended under the arms, embroidered only at the hem, where no one ever sees. That tiny detail is for you, because underclothes are the most honest part of anyone's wardrobe, not made to impress, just a comfort, to shield, to quietly serve. You recall a tale from last winter of a merchant who tried to seduce a noble's wife. He was exposed, literally, when servants discovered he wore dyed red braize, silk blended, a clear breach of both sumptuary law and good sense. Word spread like fire, and people mocked him for weeks, not for his advances, but for having the audacity to flirt while wearing undergarments better than the knights. You dunk a chemise into the cold water and begin scrubbing. The fabric is soft, older than you, nearly translucent from years of wear. You've worn some like this before, threadbare shifts passed down through cousins, the linen bleached only by sun and river. Every rip was a risk, a torn hem at the wrong time, and suddenly your reputation was in tatters too. Because being seen in your underclothes, accidentally or otherwise, was sometimes worse than being seen unclothed. Nakedness could be explained, bathing perhaps, or healing. But a shift, that was the space between public and private, the thing that reminded everyone of how close the body always was beneath the surface. You glance around the bank. No men today. That helps. Still, everyone turns their garments inside out before hanging them, just in case. The river flows, garments drip, secrets dry in silence. You finish wringing out the last chemise and begin hanging the undergarments along a makeshift line strung between two trees. They flap in the breeze like pale ghosts, a village of invisible lives strung out to dry. Beside you, an older woman smooths a worn linen shift over a branch. "This one belonged to my mother," she says softly. "She birthed 6 children in it. I'll be buried in it too if it holds." You glance at the garment, thin, patched, nearly translucent around the seams. It isn't beautiful, but it's sacred. A lifetime, softened by water and years. Not far off, a girl is scrubbing a modesty cloth. A small square worn beneath a woman's chemise or tucked inside the bodice to absorb sweat and preserve the neckline. Her face flushes as it slips from her hands and lands in the mud. She rushes to retrieve it before anyone notices, because even the smallest, most unseen piece of linen holds meaning. It's not just cloth, it's character. In the fields beyond the river, a group of workers move steadily, bending and lifting, backs glinting under the sun. You know what lies beneath their tunics. Braize knotted with fraying ties, shifts with slits for ease of movement, cloth that rubs against skin until skin becomes calloused enough not to care. Those garments will be peeled off tonight, re-wrung, perhaps worn again before they're truly clean, and no one but the washer will ever know. You think of the washerwomen in bigger towns who've made a science of reading people by their undergarments. "This one's mistress is pregnant," they'll say, holding up a shift with new underarm gussets. Or, "That boy's turned clumsy," based on how the knees of his hose have worn thin. It's gossip, yes, but it's also record-keeping, in cloth instead of ink. Back home, you fold your own chemise carefully. The neckline is frayed where you always tug it when nervous. You don't patch it. You leave it, like a fingerprint, invisible to others but known to you. Later your brother stumbles in from the field, trailing dirt and hay. He strips to his braize and flops near the fire, not thinking twice about who sees. But your aunt scolds him anyway. "Cover yourself," she snaps. "Even the body has its clothes." And that's the truth of it. Clothing isn't a barrier from the world. It's the story we tell about how we carry ourselves through it. And underclothes? They're the parts we don't share in public. Not because we're ashamed, but because they're too close to the bone. Before bed, you hang your chemise near the hearth. It swings slightly in the warm air, like a breath. You smooth the shoulders and whisper a silent promise to repair the neckline. Eventually. You lie down in your shift, pulling the wool blanket up to your chin. Beneath it all, it's the linen that touches your skin. The soft, frayed, familiar cloth that has known your laughter, your labour, your sleep, and tomorrow it will know you again. You awaken to the sound of wind clawing at the shutters and the distinct snap of frost on the window ledge. Your breath fogs before your face. The hearth has long since gone cold, and the rushes beneath your feet feel like they've turned to ice. You dress quickly, instinctively, shift, hose, tunic, but none of it helps. The cold isn't outside the clothes, it's inside them. The winter has crept into your sleeves, and still you're luckier than some. You wrap a coarse woolen cloak around your shoulders and step outside. The frost crunches beneath your feet, and the world is pale and still, the kind of morning that bites without asking permission. Across the way, a young boy scampers down the lane, bare-kneed, teeth chattering, hands stuffed inside the sleeves of a tunic 3 sizes too big. You wonder how he's not frozen solid, but you remember, movement is warmth, stillness is surrender, so you move, and as you move you think, how did people survive winters like this, without fleece-lined boots or feather-down coats? The answer, as always, is in the layers. Your first is linen, thin and soft, worn close to the skin. It wicks sweat when you're working, but today it's stiff, almost crackling at the seams from where last night's dampness didn't fully dry. Over that, the tunic, a dense wool, dark brown, patched with a lighter weave at the elbows. You tug it closer, then reach for your second tunic, slightly looser. The air between the layers traps heat. That air, not the cloth, is what keeps you alive. A third layer, your sleeveless surcoat, rough wool, scratchy, stiffened at the shoulders with old linen backing. You wear it year-round, but in winter it earns its keep. Then comes the cloak, heavy as a small child and about as cooperative. It swings unevenly when you walk, and the wind catches the hem like a sail, but without it, your back would freeze straight through. And on days like this, even the men wear coifs, close-fitting caps tied under the chin, often lined with fur or scraps of fleece. You've seen farmers wrap extra linen around their necks and stuff wool under their hats to keep their ears from freezing. One shepherd you know wears fingerless gloves layered over another pair, tied with twine at the wrist to trap heat. It's not elegant. It's survival by improvisation. You remember the time your uncle swore by lining his boots with dried moss, claimed it worked better than straw. He still lost a toenail to frostbite, but he kept the rest, said the trick was to change it midday, before your sweat turned the moss to ice. And sweat, it's the enemy. If your clothes get damp, they betray you. Wet wool still insulates, but not forever. That's why you see so many overcoats stiff with frozen dew, worn like armour. People walk through winter layered not in warmth, but in delay. A delay of the cold's arrival. By the river, 2 washerwomen beat garments against the ice. They don't smile. Their sleeves are rolled tight, and their aprons are stiff. One wears leg wraps made of old sacking cloth, looped and tied from ankle to knee. No hose, just layers of threadbare defence. You pass a man repairing a fence. His nose is red, and he's wrapped a wool scarf so wide around his neck that it nearly covers his mouth. He's working with gloves that have no fingers. He moves fast. Not because he wants to, but because if he stops, the cold will find the soft places in his joints. Winter is not a season. It's a test. And your clothes are the answers, scribbled hurriedly in wool, linen and prayer. By midday the wind sharpens. It knifes down the lane, dragging loose straw and grit, and you press your cloak tighter with one hand while the other shields your eyes. The cold has shifted. No longer just biting, but chewing. You duck into the smithy for warmth, where the forge glows like an open wound, and the air smells of soot and singed wool. Inside, it's warm, almost dangerously so. You watch as the apprentice peels off his outer tunic, revealing an inner shirt soaked in sweat. He fans himself, but you know the danger isn't here. It's what happens when he steps back outside, wet cloth clinging to his ribs, inviting the cold in like a dinner guest. You've heard tales of men who collapsed hours after leaving the forge, not from injury, but from damp wool and cold air. That's why some people change midday, switching into dry clothes if they have the luxury. You don't. Most don't. So you learn to manage. You layer differently in winter. Tighter weaves close to the skin, looser over top. You use every scrap. The sleeves of your old tunic. Now arm warmers. That burned apron, lined and stitched into a back flap for your cloak, blocking wind where it hits hardest. You help the smith haul ash buckets outside, and in those few moments, your eyelashes freeze. The wind lifts your hood, and you're struck with a pain so sudden behind your ear it feels like a bee sting. You wrap the hood tighter, muttering under your breath, and vow to line it with fleece before the next freeze. Later, at home, you shed your outer layers by the hearth. The cloak thuds to the floor like a wet dog. Your second tunic, stiff at the cuffs, is hung near the fire, along with your hose, which steamed when you pulled them off. Your fingers tingle as warmth returns. You wrap them in a square of flannel cut from an old shift. You keep these things in a box, cold cloths turned warm by fire, worn by time but faithful. Your grandmother, settled near the coals, unwraps her feet. She wears felted boots sewn from old woolen caps, tied with garter strings from a wedding dress no one remembers. Her socks are layered, linen inner, wool outer, all stitched with mismatched thread. She once told you that the trick to winter wasn't just covering your skin. It was remembering where the wind likes to go. Necks, wrists, the small of the back, inside elbows, behind knees. You sit beside her, mending a rip in your second tunic. The seam split at the shoulder, probably from lifting too much wood yesterday. As you stitch, you reinforce it with a scrap of fur salvaged from an old glove lining. Not pretty, but warmer. You think of those who don't have enough. The beggar who wraps his legs in bramble-woven mats. The woman who pads her shoes with feathers. You once saw a child with sleeves made from stitched-together rags, each piece a different colour, like a walking quilt. People laughed, but she stayed warm. Before bed, you lay your layers near the fire, not too close. You've heard stories of night tunics catching, burning in the dark. You set your shoes upside down, stuff them with hay. You slide into your shift and pull on your second pair of socks. You tug the blanket close and feel the warmth gather, slow and loyal. Outside, the frost is already blooming on the shutters, but you're wrapped in memory, wool, and stitched stubbornness. And for tonight at least, you're warm. You're sitting by the fire, darning a hole in your sleeve when the door creaks open and a small figure slips inside. It's your neighbour's boy, 5 winters old, face pink from cold, arms bundled in a cloak far too large. He's carrying a basket of eggs and wearing a cap so wide it droops over both ears, nearly covering his eyes. You thank him, take the basket and watch as he shakes off his boots. They're tied with twine and stuffed with scraps of fleece, one tighter than the other. His hose are baggy, patched at both knees, and he walks like he's not sure where his legs end and the clothes begin. That's childhood here. Wrapped in someone else's clothes, stitched smaller, tied tighter, handed down like family stories. Because in the medieval world, no one dresses children like children. They're miniature adults, in every way that matters. By the time they're 2 or 3, they're out of swaddling. The layers are fewer, but the rules begin. The toddler in the next cottage wears a lace tunic with sleeves just short enough to let his hands peek out. His mother cuffs them to keep him from dipping them in the butter. She jokes that by next year he'll be binding his own hose. You believe her. In town, you pass a girl of about 8, balancing a jug of water on one hip. Her kirtle is stained with ash, and the belt at her waist is long enough to wrap twice. likely borrowed from her older sister. Her coif is crooked, her cheeks smudged, but her posture is perfect. Because she's been told since she could walk, stand like a lady. Walk like your clothing is watching. You remember being dressed by your mother, arms lifted, breath held, as she tugged a stiff linen smock over your head. You hated the feeling of cloth on wet hair, the way the seams itched at your shoulders. But you also remember the warmth of her hands, the careful way she tied the belt, the quiet pride in her eyes when she stepped back and nodded. Most children here wear what's available, a tunic 3 sizes too big. Fold the sleeves, tie it tight, hose from a cousin 2 villages over, cut them at the knee, let the socks take up the slack. Clothing is a puzzle you grow into, piece by awkward piece. You once helped dress your younger cousin for a feast. The only gown that fit had been sewn for someone twice her age, so you pinned it at the waist, rolled the sleeves, and stitched a pleat at the neckline. By the time she was done, she looked like a young noblewoman, until she tripped over the hem trying to bow. Everyone laughed. She did too. But later that night she whispered, "I liked how I looked, just for once." And that's the secret. Even in hand-me-downs and odd sizes, children learn early that clothing is power, not just warmth, not just modesty, but identity. I am the one with the red sash. I am the girl with the patched elbows. I am the boy whose shoes squeak because the left one used to be a right. Outside, you hear a shriek of laughter. A group of children runs past, one in a fur-lined cap meant for a grown man, another wearing a cloak that drags behind like a royal train. They're pretending to be kings and knights and saints. They twirl, shout, trip, and in their own way, they're dressed for exactly who they are. Later that evening, you find yourself in the candlelit stillness of your neighbour's cottage. The boy who brought the eggs is asleep in the corner, curled beneath a patched wool blanket, a threadbare cloak rolled into a pillow beneath his head. His tiny boots, wet from melted frost, are turned upside down by the hearth, and his cap, now slipped askew, still covers one ear but not the other. You're helping his mother sew. Her needle moves quickly, but her eyes look tired. She holds up a tunic, sighs, and says, "It was his father's, before he outgrew childhood and sense." She chuckles softly and folds a pleat along the hem. "I'll make it fit again." And this, you realise, is the magic. Clothes in a medieval home don't just pass from child to child. They pass through memory. Every sleeve has a story. Every stain is a lesson. That patched corner on the back of the tunic, where the boy sat too close to the fire last year, that wide cuff, let out last spring after a growth spurt. A child's wardrobe is not a collection. It's a timeline. You think back to your own garments as a child, the linen shirt with red embroidery around the collar, a gift from your aunt who could barely see but stitched by feel. You remember the scratchy woolen hose that made your legs itch, and the warm winter mittens made from leftover sheep's wool that still smelled faintly of the animal even after washing. Even poor families try to give their children something new, even if it's just a ribbon or a coloured stitch. You once saw a mother dye a child's undershirt with onion skins to turn it faintly yellow. She called it sunshine for days without sun. The girl wore it for 3 winters, proudly. You glance across the room and see a boy of 10 wearing a doublet clearly made for a man, sleeves rolled twice, belt cinched high, but he struts in it like a noble. Because tonight it's not just a hand-me-down, it's a costume, a dream, a borrowed future. Some children learn to sew early too, not just mending, but reshaping, making a tunic longer by adding a band of cloth, or turning 2 ruined garments into one decent piece. They trade scraps with each other like sweets. I'll swap you this bit of green for a bit of blue. I'll stitch your cuff if you stitch my hem. Even in play, the logic of survival weaves into the threads. By the fire, the boy stirs and murmurs. His mother sets aside her needle, rises to tuck the blanket higher over his shoulder. Then she picks up a tiny coif from the sewing basket, too small even for him now, and fingers the edge. You recognize it. He wore it when he could barely sit up. She folds it once, then again, and places it in a wooden box beside the hearth. A memory preserved, not to be worn again, but never quite forgotten. You leave quietly, the cold air biting your nose as you step into the dark. But you carry warmth with you, not just from the fire, but from the invisible weave of family, memory and wool that wraps every child in something more than clothing. Because in a world where winters are harsh and fabric is dear, a child's coat is never just a coat. It is love, passed hand to hand. You're on the edge of the market square, standing behind a cloth merchant stall. The morning fog is still clinging to the corners of the buildings, and every breath you take comes out like a ghost. You pull your cloak tighter and glance at the merchant's hands, ink-stained, cracked at the knuckles, stacking bolts of fabric like loaves of bread. But not all cloth is equal, and you know it. Today's market is buzzing, and the people gathered here don't just want something warm, they want something that speaks. Because clothing, in this place and time, isn't just protection or modesty, it's reputation woven into wool. You pass a man in a cloak trimmed with dyed red. Madder root, not cheap. His boots are polished, his belt embossed. You can tell he's part of the town council, or wants to be. Just behind him, a baker's apprentice hurries past in a flour-dusted tunic with one shoulder torn, threadbare hose, no hat. No one moves aside for him. It's all unspoken, but everyone sees it. What you wear tells the world your story, whether or not it's true. The woman in the blue linen kirtle over there, that blue likely came from woad, a plant that stinks during fermentation and leaves your hands stained for days. And yet it's sought after, because it marks your family as able to afford dyed goods. That's why her neighbour, poorer by a good deal, wears undyed wool, greyish, itchy, honest. You glance at the bolts of cloth on display. Some are burls, a coarse peasant's weave. Some are worsted, finer and smoother, for middle-class tunics or even clerical gowns. And there, under a protective linen wrap, is a scrap of imported silk, bright and slippery like eel skin, likely traded from the East and more expensive than an entire year's worth of rent. You wouldn't dare touch it, but you stare, and the merchant watches your eyes and smiles. "Don't worry," he says, "it's not for wearing, it's for dreaming." You nod, though you know that's not entirely true. You've seen noble women glide through town in gowns so light they shimmer like candlelight, their hems embroidered with gold-wrapped thread. Not just dyed, not just imported, but transformed by the hands of someone with time, tools and money. And it's not just women, men too. That squire at the far end of the square is wearing a cloak lined with fox fur, dyed in layers to match his lord's colours. You know the livery because you've seen the banner, a stag against a red field. Heraldic symbolism stitched into clothing so it walks beside the wearer, even when the banner's not there. A lesser man wears his loyalty on his chest. You once tried to imitate it. Sewed a patch into your tunic with a crude animal, a rooster, you think, done in leftover yellow thread. You thought it might earn you favour with a merchant's guard who kept chickens on his farm. It didn't, he laughed. But you still wear that patch when the hem hasn't completely fallen off. A small reminder that clothes can be hopeful too. You reach out and feel a bolt of wool, coarse, scratchy, thick. You imagine it as a cloak, a tunic, a blanket. You think of how many eyes would see it, judge it, know you by it, and you wonder, quietly, how much of you is visible before you even speak. The wind picks up in the square, rattling the stall's canopy overhead, and the merchant curses softly as a bolt of fabric unrolls and flutters toward the ground. You help him catch it, your fingers brushing coarse wool, and he nods his thanks before snapping the cloth back into place. As you step away, your eyes are drawn to something behind him, a narrow stall tucked between the tanner's tent and a potseller's cart. It's darker, quieter. There are no bolts of cloth on display here, only trays of thread, spindles and dye cakes stacked like spices. This is not where you buy fabric. This is where fabric becomes identity. You edge closer, watching a young woman examine a small puck of deep green. The dyer explains, weld and wode, 2 dips, fix it with alum or stale urine, hold the colour longer. You blink. Did he say urine? He did, and it's true. To set many dyes, fixatives like alum or even human waste were used. It's part of the stink behind every beautiful colour. And suddenly, the elegant emerald gowns of the lady at court don't seem quite so pristine. You overhear a man ask for oxblood red. The dyer frowns and says, "You want real red, you'll need kermes, bugs from the south, crushed by the thousands, expensive." The man shakes his head and settles for madder root, cheaper, browner, less regal, but close enough from a distance. That's the quiet compromise in medieval colour, close enough from a distance. You wander away from the dyer's stall and pass a washerwoman hauling a basket of garments, tunic, kirtle, even a cap or 2. She scrubs them in a public trough. A girl beside her adds ashes to the water, lye made from fireplace soot. It stings her hands, but the soap helps whiten the cloth, at least a little. Some stains never fully come out. Wine, tallow, sweat. But most people live with them. You do too, because a perfectly clean tunic might make people suspicious. Better to look useful than idle. Further down the road, a nobleman's groom leads a mule carrying a chest full of garments. He pauses by a tavern, and you spot a young servant woman brushing the hem of a velvet cloak with a stiff boar-bristle comb, careful not to ruin the nap. Her hands are red from scrubbing, but her touch is delicate. She mutters, "They'll know if it drags mud again." You glance at your own sleeves. The edges are frayed. One elbow bears a carefully stitched patch made from a sleeve of an older garment. Different shade. Same fabric. You stitched it last week. It holds. A man walking past gives you a glance. Not hostile, but assessing. Everyone does it. A flick of the eyes over shoes, belt, tunic. The language of cloth is quiet, but fluent. He sees that your hose match, that your cloak is intact, that your shoes are scuffed but whole. You see him nod to himself, just slightly. It's not approval. Not quite. But it's not dismissal either. And that's enough to carry you through the square. Because in this world, your clothing speaks long before you do, and what it says can open doors, or close them forever. You're standing in the middle of a tailor's workshop now. Not the kind for peasants or even merchants, but one tucked behind a stone manor, hidden like a prized kitchen garden. The walls are hung with patterns, some drawn on parchment, others chalked onto bits of linen. The tailor himself is hunched over a large table, measuring, cutting, muttering. This is where the artistry of clothing becomes precision. He doesn't glance up when you enter, just gestures to the corner. Don't step on the gussets. You look down and see triangular scraps of fabric carefully stacked. They're not leftovers. They're part of the plan. Gussets will be sewn into the underarms and hips to allow movement. Every angle matters. The human body bends, twists and runs. Clothes must follow without tearing. You think back to the boxy tunics peasants wear. Simple, practical and roomy. But here, in this world of noble clients and coin-heavy purses, garments are sculpted to the body. Sewn not just for warmth or modesty, but to declare control. Control over fabric, over one's shape, over time itself. because fitted clothes require fittings, and fittings mean standing still. The tailor moves with efficiency, snipping a curve into a sleeve. He gained weight, he says dryly, gesturing toward a discarded bodice. He won't admit it, but he did. He doesn't mean to gossip, it's just part of the job. When you sew for someone, you know them. The shape of their shoulders, the slope of their spine, the swell of their gut. He tosses you a thimble. Make yourself useful. You fumble it onto your finger and begin threading a needle. The woman beside you is finishing an eyelet row for lacing, her fingers working fast, slipping a bone awl through tiny holes and reinforcing them with thread. The garment she's working on is deep green, cut low, with a front panel made to be lace tight. You imagine the woman who'll wear it, pulling the strings tighter until her chest lifts and her ribs protest. That's the point. Tight lacing is less common than some tales claim, but when used, it was to reshape the torso into an idealized form, much like padding in a man's doublet or the sloped shoulders of a herald's robe. You once tried on a friend's borrowed jerkin padded with wool and horsehair. It made you stand differently, puffed you out like a rooster. But padding has to be placed with care. You remember a young knight whose shoulders were padded unevenly, and when he turned to bow, he looked like he'd fought and lost a duel with gravity. He fired the tailor the next day. The tailor here doesn't make those mistakes. He's stitching a sleeve cap now, gathered to puff slightly above the shoulder, then taper sharply. It should make him look taller, he mutters. He isn't, but we can pretend. You glance around and see other projects in various states of undress. A cloak lined with fur, turned inside out for hemming, a gown with long trailing sleeves waiting for trim, a hatband stiffened with reeds. Each item has a purpose, not just functional but theatrical. Because here's the thing, clothing in this room isn't just protection, it's illusion, a promise of who you might be, if only for one evening. You're still in the tailor's workshop, but now your hands are busy. The tailor has handed you a strip of embroidered trim, delicate gold thread stitched into dark velvet, and asked you to help baste it to a sleeve edge. Temporary stitches only, he warns. The lady's maid will approve it before we fix it permanent. The pressure is strangely high. This trim alone could feed a village for a week. You glance over at the other workers. One is hammering small brass points into the toe of a shoe, shaping it into a fashionably long silhouette called a poulaine. Another is stuffing a doublet's chest with raw wool to give it that puffed, proud look that's in vogue this season. The tailor leans in and murmurs. He's going to a wedding. Wants to look like a hawk, not a hound. You smile, but you get it. Clothes do strange things to a man's sense of himself. You think of the last feast day, when you borrowed your cousin's long robe, cut from heavy brown wool, with embroidery at the hem that dragged behind you like a river. You remember how people stepped aside just a little sooner, how the gatekeeper barely asked your name. Just the sight of trailing fabric shifted the space around you. It made you feel taller, wiser, realer. And then there are sleeves. The tailor gestures toward a folded pile, sleeves so long they nearly touch the floor. He chuckles. Worn once, tripped twice, ruined forever. But still they're made, again and again. Sometimes, he says, it's not about walking. It's about being watched. He points to a young noble's robe pinned on a dress form. The front is plain, but when the wearer turns, a motif stitched across the back blooms like a banner. A hunting falcon mid-dive, its wings extended in metallic thread. He asked for that, the tailor adds. Said he wanted people to talk when he walked away. And they will. Because clothing is memory, movement, impression. In another corner, a seamstress is cutting a set of false sleeves, decorative, removable layers that can be tied to a gown or doublet. They allow one garment to become many, and allow the illusion of newness without the cost. Clever. You'd seen a merchant's wife wear the same gown 3 days in a row, but with different sleeves, different veils. Most hadn't noticed. Those who did probably admired her thrift. The tailor sighs and puts down his shears. Every stitch is a negotiation, he says, between comfort and show, between who you are and who they want to see. You glance back at the trim in your hands. It glows softly in the afternoon light. It's beautiful, pointless, powerful. You finish basting it to the sleeve. It's not perfect, but it will hold. And somewhere, not far from here, a woman will lift her arms tonight, and the world will pause to watch the way the gold flickers when she moves, and no one, not even her, will see the hand that stitched it on. You find yourself in the great hall again, but this time it's quiet. Morning. The fire is low. The rushes on the floor are fresh, sprinkled with herbs that crackle faintly beneath your boots. Light filters through narrow stained glass panels, spilling fragmented colour across stone and fabric alike. And standing in the centre of the room, like a statue come to life, is the lord of the manor. He's not speaking, not even moving much. He's simply being dressed. 2 servants are wrapping him in layers, each chosen with care, each movement practised. First, the linen shirt, soft from years of washing, finely woven. Then a padded undershirt, quilted just enough to give him shape. A third servant appears with hose, tied carefully to a belt beneath his tunic to keep them taut. He shifts his weight slightly, allowing the ties to pull snug. It's a ritual, a quiet theatre of status and trust. Now comes the outer tunic, deep navy wool lined with squirrel fur. You notice how the neckline has been carefully cut to sit just at the collarbone, revealing enough of the linen shirt beneath to show that it's clean, well pressed, and edged in embroidery. That subtle flash of finery says, "I have women to do my washing." And then the girdle, a richly adorned belt hung with keys, tokens, and a small purse, not for coins, for symbolism. It shows that he commands resources, that others depend on his discretion, and when he fastens it with a jewelled clasp, it frames his waist in a way that exaggerates the flare of the tunic below. It turns his body into a symbol, a pillar, a tree trunk, a fortress of flesh. His cloak comes last, pinned at the shoulder with a brooch shaped like a lion. Not a real lion, of course, but one rendered in enamel and brass. Still, the image is clear. Strength, rule, pride. You've seen him wear armour before, during inspections or when parading through town. But this feels heavier in its own way, because armour may protect, but clothing defines, and in this moment you realise just how deliberately every stitch has been placed to construct the image of authority. He turns finally and nods. "Ready the courtyard." You move to obey, but your mind lingers on the transformation you've just witnessed. The man who stood here 10 minutes ago was flesh and hair and sleep. The one who walks out now is a figurehead, sewn and stitched into existence. It makes you wonder, how much of what you believe about someone is just fabric? How many loyalties are sworn to wool and colour rather than bone and blood? Outside you hear the creak of a saddle being tightened. The Lord's horse is being readied. A servant runs ahead to alert the household. They must be seen. He must be seen, and not just seen, but remembered. You follow him into the courtyard, the crisp air brushing against your cheeks as he steps out beneath the grey morning sky. The moment he emerges, people stir, servants pause, stable hands bow slightly, and a young page scurries to hold open the gate. Not because he said anything, he doesn't have to. It's the clothes. The blue wool cloak trimmed with fur, the way it drapes just long enough to graze the stone without dragging. The embossed leather boots, polished and softened, but reinforced with stitched soles that thud with authority. Even the cut of his sleeves speaks of lineage, the wide openings lined with silk, a whisper of excess that only someone important could afford to waste. And most telling of all, his gloves, not for warmth. These are ceremonial gloves barely worn, embroidered on the back with his house's crest. Gloves that say, "I don't work with my hands, I command with them." He swings into the saddle, and even that has flair. The hem of his tunic is lifted just enough to show the contrast lining. The horse is brushed, braided, fitted with tack that gleams like morning dew. Everything is a message, composed with the same care as a painter preparing a canvas. You've seen his brother ride out in simpler garb, chainmail when needed, rough-spun wool when not. But this is different. This is presentation as performance, and like any performance, it has its rituals. A servant hands him a cap, soft velvet lined in rabbit fur with a small feather tucked neatly into the band. He adjusts it slightly, not out of vanity, but for the balance of the look. It completes the picture. A man who controls not only his household and lands, but himself. You trail behind as the procession forms. 2 guards, a steward, the lord, and 3 messengers on horseback. They're headed to negotiate a land dispute with a neighbouring manor. And you know, no matter how skilled his steward may be, the moment the other party sees your lord in his dark cloak with the lion brooch and crimson gloves, they'll hesitate. Not because he'll threaten, but because he doesn't have to. Clothing doesn't just reflect power, it manufactures it. You catch your own reflection in a window as you pass. A bit of lint on your sleeve, a spot of ink on your collar, no embroidery, no fur, no velvet feathered hat. And it hits you. Your clothes explain you before your mouth ever opens. That's why the tailor stitched those extra darts into the doublet's back. That's why the linen was pleated just so. That's why even the buckle on his belt is decorated. Because someone's always watching. And in this world, being observed is half the battle. As the hooves clatter off into the distance, the courtyard quiets. The kitchen boys go back to chopping. The stable hands return to mucking out stalls. But the image of the Lord, commanding draped in navy and gold, lingers like perfume in the air. You blink. It's already fading from your eyes, but not from your mind. You're in the village now, walking along the muddy path between timber-framed homes, where laundry flaps like flags above the alleyways and the smell of bread fights with a sharper scent of dung. Here, fashion plays by different rules, not dictated by courts or heralds, but by climate, thrift, and survival. A woman passes you, balancing a basket of eggs on her hip. She wears a coarse kirtle of undyed wool, hitched at the sides with woven cords to keep the hem from dragging through the muck. Beneath it, a linen shift peeks through, patched at the elbows, worn thin at the cuffs. Not beautiful, but durable, layered, and clean, and that means something. Nearby, a boy chases a dog barefoot, his tunic riding high as he runs. The garment is stitched from 3 different shades of cloth, probably cut from old pieces. His mother likely turned a worn-out gown into something passable for him, and on her own head, a coif made from a flour sack, washed, bleached, and tied tight against the wind. You pause beside a cart, watching as a tanner hauls hides into a shed. He's stripped to his shirt, stained dark with sweat and lime. His breeches are rolled and held up by a belt that once belonged to someone of higher rank. You can tell. It still bears a worn silver fitting now dull with use. It's a different language of clothing here. Every item speaks of reuse. A sleeve turned inside out to hide the fray. A surcoat cut down to fit a growing daughter. Even the village priest wears a patched wool robe, the black now fading to grey, but the collar carefully mended by some unknown hand. Someone who still believed in dignity, even when the purse was light. Fashion in the countryside isn't about first impressions, It's about lasting impressions, what holds up through winter storms and harvest days. And yet, even here, there are flourishes. On market day, you see a girl with a ribbon woven through her braid, dyed a soft blue, likely from elderberries. Her shoes are mismatched, but she walks like she's in silk. Nearby, a shepherd wraps a scarf printed with tiny embroidered suns, each one no bigger than a fingernail. He probably stitched them himself in the off-season, because even when clothing is scarce, ornament finds a way. And when the Lord's retinue passes through, like it did this morning, the whole village takes notice. Children point at the brooches, women whisper about the sleeve linings. A young man runs a hand over his stubble and mutters that he'll need to let out his best tunic next time. It isn't envy exactly, it's aspiration, and it goes both ways. You remember hearing about a noblewoman, wealthy, proud, who visited a distant estate and returned wearing a peasant's leather bodice style, claiming it freed the breath. She had a dozen made in silk. Even the mighty steal from the meek if the cut is clever enough. The bell tolls in the village church tower as the sun dips behind the trees, bathing the cottages in a soft, amber hue. You take a seat on a low stone wall, watching the locals settle in for the evening, and as they pass you by, carrying baskets, herding goats, fetching water, you begin to notice something unexpected. Subtle patterns. A man's cloak closes with an old antler button. The same style appears on 3 others. A woman's sleeves are tied with criss-crossing laces, identical to the ones worn by her sister and their neighbour and the innkeeper's wife. You realise you're looking at village fashion, though no one would call it that. Not loud, not fast-changing, but it's there, organic, local, and full of meaning. In fact, one of the oddest things about medieval rural clothing is how it preserved identity more faithfully than court fashion ever could. When nobles changed styles every season to keep up appearances, villagers kept their cuts and habits for generations. It wasn't laziness, it was tradition. Sometimes even defiance, and each piece carried a story. Take Marjorie, the baker's wife. She still wears her mother's apron, despite the thinness of the cloth, but the straps have been restitched in red thread, a colour once reserved for Sundays or feasts. No one asks why, they just know. The apron means something more than flour and fire. Or old Tom, the thatcher, who walks with a stoop and carries a satchel lined with fox fur scraps. They're coarse and patched in badly, but they came from a wedding gift long ago, and when he places the bag down at the tavern, the others nod, not in awe, but in recognition. That bag is part of the village's memory now. These rural clothes don't aim to impress strangers, they connect generations. A ribbon passed down, a hat reblocked for a new head, a linen shawl that once wrapped a newborn and now rests on a grandmother's shoulders. But perhaps the most surprising truth is this. Even without mirrors, people care deeply about how they appear. You watch as 2 girls laugh and spin in circles, their hems flying just high enough to reveal intricately patched underlayers. One has sewn tiny beads along her neckline. Glass, not pearl, but they catch the last light beautifully. And for a second she looks like a lady. That's the quiet magic of peasant clothing. It dreams. Within its limits it borrows, adapts, and sometimes even dares. And when the church festival comes, the one everyone waits for, they go all out. Coats brushed, smocks bleached, a bit of goose fat rubbed on the boots for shine, ribbons steamed over kettles, laces double knotted. It's a fashion show without a runway, a celebration of community told in woolen thread. As the day ends, you stand and stretch. A soft breeze moves through the trees. Somewhere in the village, someone is folding their tunic for morning. Someone else is unpicking a hem by firelight, preparing for next Sunday. The clothes of the countryside may be humble, but they're worn with pride, stitched with care, and passed down with love, and in their quiet way they say just as much as a jewelled cloak or lion brooch ever could. You find yourself beneath the vaulted ceiling of a merchant's hall, bustling, echoing, and layered with scents of candle wax, leather, and ambition. This isn't a castle, and it's not a village. It's something in between, the world of the rising middle, the merchant class, ever expanding, ever dressing upward. And here, fashion walks a tightrope. The man beside you, a cloth dealer from Flanders, wears a doublet of fine wool, dyed a striking madder red, a shade not easily come by, and certainly not cheap. But his sleeves are conservative, his hose modest. He's wealthy, no doubt. But flaunting that too boldly could invite suspicion, jealousy, or worse, accusations of forgetting your place. So you learn quickly. Blend the cues of nobility with the restraint of respectability. The result is a wardrobe that whispers success, polished boots but not gilded, a fur collar but rabbit, not ermine, silver buttons perhaps, but no gemstones. The merchant knows that looking almost noble earns him access. Looking too noble earns him enemies. And then there's his wife. She enters behind him, draped in a gown of fig-coloured wool, soft and heavy, with a narrow belt of worked leather and a clasp shaped like a tulip. You notice how her sleeves are detachable, a clever touch, both fashionable and practical. It means she can swap them out to suit the day's business, or keep them from fraying, or impress a rival without buying a whole new outfit. Fashion here is modular, adaptive. There's even talk of new sleeve shapes coming in from Italy. Slashed sleeves, puffed ones, or ones laced so tightly they look like armour. The hall hums with it, cloth sellers and tailors, spinners and cobblers, all weaving a new language of aspiration. One man speaks excitedly about a new ledger stitch, not a sewing method, but an account trick to hide wardrobe spending under business expenses. You laugh softly. Clothing is becoming not just a statement, but an investment, a social gamble. And yet the merchant doesn't forget function. His cloak, though lush, is lined with wool wadding, designed to keep in warmth on long trade journeys. His wife's shoes, soft at first glance, are reinforced with a thick leather sole for walking cobbled markets. These clothes travel, negotiate, sell. They must endure customs, climates, currencies, and still command attention. You step into a tailor's stall drawn by a rich bolt of blue-grey fabric. The merchant smiles. "That's Coventry wool," he says. "Good enough for a duke, priced for a banker." There's pride here. Not the idle pride of lineage, but the earned pride of trade. He touches the cloth with reverence. Not long ago his father wore homespun, and now here he stands, choosing between fine twills and Italian velvet. But there's tension too. His son runs in, hat askew, pointing at a nobleman's retinue riding by. "Can we get a plume like that?" he asks. The merchant frowns, then softens. "Not yet," he says, "but soon." Because every stitch they wear is a rung on a ladder and they're climbing. The light shifts through the merchant's hall as the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across bolts of cloth and baskets of buttons. The bustle softens. One by one, stalls close, shutters creak shut, and the whispers of commerce give way to the quieter rustle of closing ledgers and brushed coats. But you linger a moment longer, watching as fashion, ever hungry, ever shifting, reveals its final layer. Now you notice something subtle, the echo of nobility in every stitch. A gold-threaded hem here, a brooch in the shape of a falcon there. Symbols once reserved for those born into power being worn carefully by those who earned it coin by coin. It's ambition worn like armour, and this ambition has its own dangers. You overhear a soft conversation between two women outside the door. One warns the other, "Be careful how bright your sleeves shine." The guild master's wife took note. Even in fashion there's politics. A hem an inch too long could be read as arrogance, a ribbon too wide as rebellion. This world is governed not by sumptuary laws alone, but by unwritten rules. How much is too much? How little is too risky? You recall the story of a brewer's daughter who wore silk on a saint's day and was whispered about for weeks, not because she looked foolish, but because she looked dangerous. Still, fashion in this class isn't just mimicry, it's invention. You notice a man adjusting his tri-layered hat, shaped unlike anything worn in court or countryside. A new design, his own, made to stand out at trade fairs, to be remembered by buyers, and it worked. He's already sold out twice this month. This middle world invents from necessity. It borrows the best of both extremes. The nobleman's polish, the peasant's practicality. And in that synthesis, it creates something new, something distinct, something proudly in between. As you step out into the street, the merchant's family locks up behind you. Their lantern glows through the window. Inside, you glimpse the wife folding away her sleeves, the child polishing his boots for tomorrow. Quiet rituals, the same way a knight might lay out his armour, because in this world, clothing is armour. And as you pass through the square, you see others like them. A baker's apprentice wearing a dyed jerkin with geometric cuts, a candle maker whose apron bears a monogram stitched in gold thread. Small details, but each one a signal. We are here, we matter, we rise. They aren't trying to disappear into the ranks of nobility. They're building a new class, a new culture, a new identity. And so, the story of medieval clothing ends, not with a crown or a crest, but with a tailor's chalk mark, a borrowed brooch, a careful re-hemmed sleeve. Not with who you were born, but with what you chose to wear, again and again and again. Because in the end, that's what clothing always was, a choice, whether whispered through threadbare linen or shouted in velvet. And now, you're back beneath your own soft blankets. No doublet, no girdle, no itchy wool tunic, just you and the quiet hum of the night. Tonight, you've travelled through chambers and cottages, across muddy fields and echoing halls. You've traced the seams of 1,000 garments, some regal, some ragged, all stitched with stories. You've seen how fashion was never just fashion. It was identity, ambition, survival, and resistance. A language without words, passed from mother to daughter, from merchant to clerk, from tailor's chalk to candle-lit ballroom. Maybe now, as your eyes begin to close, you'll carry those threads with you. A splash of madder red, the glint of a stolen brooch, the comforting rustle of linen folded by firelight. You're safe here. No sumptuary laws to bind you, no icy castle corridors to wander, just the soft breath of sleep waiting on the other side of memory. So let go, drift. Let the rustle of silks and the whisper of homespun fade into the background. You've worn enough stories for one night. Tomorrow the world will spin again. But for now, you rest.